It has. Okay, you're on air. Right, so a couple of housekeeping things first, just to announce before we start, which is fire alarm arrangements. If there's a continuous alarm sounding at any point in the meeting, out the doors, back to reception, leave the building and congregate outside the Great Hall. There are toilet facilities available very close to this room. There is a hearing loop which is permanently switched on, so if you use a hearing aid or need a neck loop, both are available on request from reception. Please silence your mobile phones. The press and members of the public are permitted to film and broadcast the public sessions of this meeting, so those around the table, by entering and remaining in the meeting, you are consenting to being filmed and recorded, and to the possible use of those images for broadcast purposes. So I hope you've all done your hair. Filming is only permitted in this room while the meeting is taking place, so must stop if the meeting is adjourned or closed. Filming is not permitted elsewhere in the building. Right, on to item 1, apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Vivian Atchwell from Winchester City Council, and Jonathan Williams is here as her deputy. Welcome, Jonathan. Also from Councillor Philip Davies from East Hampshire. Tom Hanrahan, is Tom? Tom isn't here. Okay, well, if he does turn up, he will be the deputy. And Karen Lucioni from the Isle of Wight has also apologised, and her deputy is unable to attend. Is anyone aware of any other apologies? Okay, hopefully we'll have some more attending in due course. Number 2 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations to make? Okay, all right. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. That was the 20th of October. Are they confirmed as a correct record, those that were present? Do you agree? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. There will be minutes of the confirmation hearing that we held on the 7th of December will follow. Item 4, questions and deputations. There are none. Item 5, Chairman's announcements. Just a few brief matters. There was a letter received from the Home Office on the 9th of January, and that was regarding plans to improve support to police and crime panels by implementing a new best practice hub. That will be hosted by a local authority and funded by the Home Office. The Home Office will be inviting bids from local authorities who would like to host the hub and intend to award the successful host local authority by April. So we'll have no doubt further details on that. Second item is legal support to the panel, and you might recall that at our last meeting we had a report regarding the need to re-tender for legal support to the panel due to the current contract expiring at the end of March. A letter was sent to all local authorities on the panel inviting them to submit an expression of interest. A report will come to our next meeting in March to confirm the outcome of this process so that a new contract can start at the beginning of April. And then finally, precept briefings. 2 briefings have been provided for all panel members to support scrutiny of the precept at this meeting. And at a briefing in early December, we heard from the Chief Finance Officer to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner regarding how the budget was being put together. A further briefing was held last week at which the figures for the proposed budget and precept were outlined, and I hope panel members did find those sessions useful and they'll support an informed debate at our meeting this morning. Item 6 is Police and Crime Panel recruitment to independent co-opted member positions. And as agreed at the last meeting, recruitment has been undertaken to fill the independent vacancy on the panel and for the second independent member for the forthcoming term. So the recruitment task and finish group, which was appointed by the panel, that was a cross-party panel which comprised Councillor Atchwell for the Liberals, Councillor Renyard for Labour and me for Conservative. And we held interviews in early January, and the appointments which we're presenting, and these were unanimously agreed for approval, are Shirley Young to continue for a second term which will start in July 2024, and Trevor Cartwright to fill the vacancy, who would take up the post straight away. And both appointments would be for a term which would run to the panel's AGM in 2028. So that's the situation there. So does anyone have any questions or comments they want to make on that particular item? Or are you happy to agree the Councillor Craig.
Wrong one. Can I just congratulate both Shirley and Trevor as well? It's nice to see Trevor back, actually. So just congratulations.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, that's subject to us agreeing. But thank you for supplying those congratulations. So, members, do you agree that those appointments are made? And I think I probably need to ask for a show of hands just so we can make sure that is clear and it's clearly agreed. And Shirley, you're abstaining for obvious reasons. So that is agreed. So congratulations, I think, for that term through to 2028. And Trevor, would you like to come and join us? I think there's a name tag here which was prepared in anticipation. Okay, that's done. So the panel is now complete. So we now move on to item 7, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner's announcement. So I'd like to invite our Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna, and looks like you've got a little retinue to join you as well. So you're all really welcome. And if you'd like to come forward and take your seats. And while they're taking their seats, I'd particularly like to welcome Kate Gunson, who is the new Chief of Staff at the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And it was Kate who we interviewed, a number of members of the panel interviewed recently, and confirmed her appointment. So welcome, Kate. And Donna, over to you.
Good morning, Chair, and probably slightly late to say this now, but Happy New Year to the panel members. It's nice to see you all for the first time this year, and congratulations as well to Trevor and to Shirley for being back on the panel. I'm going to keep my under Commissioners updates relatively short, Chair, because I know there's an awful lot on the agenda, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the salient points from the report that was sent through to you yesterday. So as you say, this is Kate Gunson's first meeting as the Chief of Staff, so the Head of Paid Service for the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner. And I once again want to reiterate my thanks to the panel for their support of Kate's appointment last month. I have hosted my inaugural Cybercrime and Fraud Summit for business leaders and partnerships across the county, supported by the National Crime Agency, the Constabulary, the South East Cyber Resilience Centre and the banking industry. We had 4 national banks represented at my Cyber Security and Fraud Summit that was held in Winchester since we've last met. In terms of I've also awarded more than £4 million of support services to victims of sexual crimes, and to help them recover. The contract spans 5 years and is available to all victims of sexual violence and abuse of any age. And in fact, it is the biggest sexual violence therapeutic support contract that the county has ever seen. And I'm grateful to my co-commissioners for supporting that contract as well. Since I've awarded the contract, I've also done an audit of waiting times, particularly for children and those under the age of 18 who are waiting for therapeutic and sexual support following a sexual assault or rape. And I'm about to allocate some more funding to those charities to make sure that the waiting times are down under 6 weeks, because I don't think it's acceptable for children to be having to wait up to 9 months for support. The same does go for adults as well. In terms of the audit that my office led on the review of the 101 service and the conclusion of that audit, which some of you through subcommittee have had on the panel, showed that only 23% of the calls coming into the 101 service over the last couple of years were actually for a policing purpose, with the majority of calls coming in actually being predominantly for local authority or for health. County line gangs and the County Lines Intensification Week has taken place since we've last met, and I'm really delighted to say that 15 county lines coming into Hampshire and the Isle of Wight were disrupted by the force, 87 arrests were made and 203 stop and searches were carried out, with over £106,000 worth of illegal drugs taken off the streets. I've also launched Project Reset, which is an initiative linked to my Violent Reduction Unit, which, as you know, is my Home Office funded programme, which is focused on tackling serious violence between 14 and 24-year-olds. And I think we may come back to that later in the agenda, so I'm not going to dwell on that any longer at this point. I published my annual report, and again, thanks to the panel for their support of that. And it did cover the achievements in the last 12 months, but particularly and probably most notably, the recruitment of 650 police officers. So the 600 sort of just over a year ago that came to an end, and then the 50, as you'll remember this time last year that I announced, we're now at that point where by April of this year, all of the 50 will then be in force. The Chief has another passing out parade next week as well. And the announcement of the opening of the 10 more police stations and front counters, and that obviously has been covered in the last annual report. More recently as well, thanks to the Chief working with Chief Constable Andy Marsh, the Chief Executive of the College of Policing, Hampshire has been named as one of 3 trailblazer forces across the country, following the Chief's redesign of the non-degree entry route for new police officers when they are joining the police service in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and that has now been modelled nationally. So, big congratulations and thanks to Chief Constable Scott Chilton and the Learning and Development team at Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary. We were awarded £1 million here for Safer Streets Round 5, and again, big thanks to all of you, your community safety managers and local authorities for the work that we were able to do there. It's the first time ever with Safer Streets, bearing in mind this was the 5th round, we've actually had every council has had a part of that £1 million. We have struggled to engage with some of the councils in the past, but through a lot of work with my team, so thanks to Kate and the team and your CSP managers, we've managed to actually get all councils getting a share of that money, which I think is incredibly important. And as you know, it's aimed at reducing neighbourhood crimes, violence against women and girls, and particularly antisocial behaviour as well. And I'm about to announce some more money to tackle ASB. I'll be writing to all councillors, CSP managers, council leaders and members of Parliament in the next week or so around another £500,000 that we are about to put into tackling ASB. So if you've got issues in your wards, please have a think about that, and we'll be turning that money around fairly quickly. During the National Week of Combating Crime, the Chief's Operation Sceptre team were able to take 550 knives off the streets and or through the surrender bins, which again is an incredible piece of work, and that is potentially a number of lives saved. Hampshire and the Isle of Wight custody visitors. So you'll know that one of my statutory duties is to have an independent custody visitor service to make sure that standards of the way that detainees are held when they are in custody meets the Home Office required threshold in conjunction with the College of Policing guidance. And I'm really pleased that the Hampshire and Isle of Wight OPCC Independent Custody Visitor Team have been awarded a National Recognition Award for their service, and that is for the 2nd year running. They were nominated, but they did actually win the award this year, which, well, in the last 12 months, which is really good. I was also appointed as a non-executive director of Hampshire Chamber of Commerce in the beginning of December. And that is, of course, because unlike members of Parliament, I do actually have a duty to represent businesses as well as the public themselves. And so it is very important that with the growth in crimes affecting online space and the growth that we see coming, particularly for SMEs, that there is a strong connection from businesses across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight into my office as Police and Crime Commissioner. Moving on then, £458,081 worth of investment towards projects preventing crime across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight in the 2nd round of my Emerging Needs Fund, and I did provide you with a list previously of what they were. Very happy to share that with anyone if you're looking for examples in your own wards or your own council areas if you'd like to see that. I also have highlighted progress being made by Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary since the introduction of the Chief Constable's new operating model. Big press release went went out with highlighting a significant reduction in crime over the last 12 months in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, which has seen 6,700 less crimes being committed, charge rates increasing, and particularly crimes going down in burglary, serious violence, antisocial behaviour. And whilst there has been a small increase, we've noticed in domestic abuse, we think this is about the increase and confidence in reporting, as opposed to there being a genuine spike in incidents happening. We do think that it is, as I say, it's about the fact that we've done so much messaging over the last 2 years around reporting domestic abuse, coercive and controlling behaviour, for example, and that has led to that slight increase. Very finally, Chair, my last couple of comments. More recently, you may have seen through social media and the coverage that we put out to press and to your councils that the opening of Cowes Police Station happened 2 weeks ago. Both the Chief and I were there to open that, and we were joined by the High Sheriff of the Isle of Wight, which we were very grateful for her attendance. And this is the first, as I say, in that series of 10 front counters and new police buildings that will be opening to better connect the public to their police service over the next 18 months. In the last few days, I've held my Commissioner's Oversight of Policing Services, my COPS session, which is our Facebook Live event between the Chief and I, where the public have the opportunity to put questions directly to the Chief and to me, and to hold me to account for the way that I am overseeing the improvements in the force. I've launched the local Bobby scheme, which has probably been one of the biggest things that I've done since I've been the Commissioner, very much with thanks to the support. Of course, these are staff that work for and are the staff of the Chief Constable. I simply was able to fund them, and making sure that every community now has access to a named local Bobby, a contactable police officer, and these are not PCSOs, although PCSOs could be very good in the model as well. These are warranted police officers, phone number, name and email address for every community across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, all on the Constabulary's website, and you can go on there and either pick the ward, the division that you live in, or you can put in your postcode and it brings up your contactable police constable. And it really has been, I've had an overwhelming response from the public on this local Bobby, the launch of the local Bobbies, and really this is me doing my job, really, because that's what the public have told me that they really want for the last two years, and I've had to make sure that we have the money to do that. 99 dedicated police officers, so you can understand that's quite a commitment to be able to do it. And very finally, from me, Chief, the 101 call waiting times. I know that you covered this in a deep dive previously, and I know that I think we're due to give you a more significant update at the next panel meeting in March, which is what you'd requested. But the 101 call wait times, it would be remiss of me not to mention that today, and I'm sure the Chief may in his comments as well, but to say that we have gone from probably bottom quartile in the country with that pain that we've been feeling over 21, 22, and me waiting, obviously, for the new Chief to start to be able to get on with seeing those improvements happening. We're now up into the top 4 or 5 forces in the country. It has been a significant turnaround. It has been a significant focus and commitment from the Chief Constable, Deputy Chief Constable Sam Derea, and the teams, and I am so grateful for what they've done. And I finally have given evidence at the Home Affairs Select Committee about Police and Crime Commissioners 12 years on a couple of weeks ago. Very happy to share with any of you a link if you'd like to view that. Co-hosted the National Policing Summit in November with the National Police Chief Council Chair Gavin Stevens, and 2 days ago I did meet with Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary, Alex Norris, Shadow Policing Minister, and the Shadow Lord Chancellor Shabana Mahmood, in my guise as Chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, working with them in the national space in preparation for perhaps a potential change in government if one comes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Donna, for a very comprehensive report, and thank you for circulating it in advance, which I know members appreciate. So what we're going to do now, if anybody has any questions they would like to ask, specifically questions of clarification on the report that Donna has provided by way of her announcements today, then please ask them, and I'll come to Alan in just a second. I had just 2 points actually. One, many congratulations to the force on the issues around 101, and that really is positive to hear, because that, I think we all regarded and accepted, was something of a failing service, and it wasn't providing what was needed to people. Interested to hear your comments as well about how many of the calls are actually reporting crimes or are other issues entirely. Clearly there's still work to be done there, I guess, in terms of public education to see that improvement, which I'm sure will make the service even better. I had just one point I wanted to make, though. That was on the named constables now, which is clearly an extremely positive thing to happen, but it was literally, not wanting to sound moany, but the web page itself, excellent that you can put in your postcode or put in your street address and find it, but that huge morass of sort of names, some of which relate to wards, some of which might be areas, the time it takes to kind of plough through that, just a suggestion, might be better just not to have that and just let people search on their street or their postcode and they'll get it instantly, because I did have a few people contact me when I promoted the site to say, well, this isn't on there. I think it was Grange Park actually is what this chap mentioned. And I said, well, put your street in. Oh yeah, it's there, it's fine, everything's okay. So maybe just remove all that huge pile of names, some of which cover the wards, some of which aren't wards at all. Just a suggestion.
I think it's good feedback. Obviously, it's for the chief. It's his website. And Scott may want to come in a minute. The reason is that there was a slight glitch with the postcode part working, and we'd set a date that we were going to go live, and I didn't want to not go live. And actually, those names, like Battin's ward, for example, which is Lee Park, which is the centre of Lee Park, we wouldn't necessarily recognise that specifically. It's because they are the beats. They are the police officer beats that they're allocated to, and more or less they cover wards, council wards, but there are the odd anomaly. But you're right, the postcode bit is much better, and that's for the chief to take that decision if he wants to amend that.
Brilliant, thank you. Alan.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to actually, my first point I was going to make was exactly yours that you just made, because it did cause some confusion. And especially my own, I put my own postcode in, so I came out into a ward I wasn't a member of or represented. So I do think there needs to be a little bit. I wanted to ask, how did you select the size of beats? What's the average kind of size of beat? Because you mentioned a figure of 99 dedicated officers. Presumably that's just 99 allocated from the local neighbourhood policing teams. So that was my first point.
Thank you, and I guess that would be the good point to welcome Scott to the meeting as well, and that's probably one for you.
Panel, good morning. When we talk about 99 dedicated, they're beat officers, they're beat bobbies in old-fashioned language, but there are also neighbourhood teams that cover those areas. There's also response teams, there's also specialist officers, but these are the officers that are ring-fenced in those areas. And the way that they're allocated is based upon a number of factors. It's not always an exact science. Some of it is geography. In our more rural communities, we're constantly reviewing that to make sure we've got sufficient coverage. Obviously, in our cities, in our urban areas, there is a density of antisocial behaviour, crime recorded, crime statistics over a period of time, and in effect there's a sort of formula and algorithm which isn't always perfect, which will mean what officers we allocate to where. We're actually reviewing that for the whole force, because it is really important that I make this point. The 99 dedicated beat officers are the visible connection to your community. That is not all the police you've got in your area. In fact, it's literally, you know, the front-facing element, so people can recognise who they are. So, and of course, police don't always we don't operate on boundaries, but the neighbourhood officers, the beat officers that we're talking about, they're dedicated to those boundaries. But other officers cover a whole number of wards, cross district, move across the force, deal with regional crime, etc. So it's a fairly complex situation, but a number of obvious factors around how we allocate resources come into play when it comes to the beat officers.
Thank you very much. Yes, David.
There we go. Yeah, I have a question for Donna. 650 officers recruited, which is, you know, obviously very positive. However, anecdotal evidence that I have from conversations with serving officers is that the retention of those 650 new offices is sometimes causing a problem, and I just wanted to know whether you have any comments on the selection process or means to try and retain those officers once they've completed training and are in service.
It's a good question. Thank you very much. So this is one of the reasons why the Chief and I had a very long conversation as part of his interview process around the PEQF, the Police Entry Degree Qualification, because we know that new officers starting into the force, coming from perhaps a retail background, customer service background, learning policing, learning the law, and also then studying for a degree at the same time, meant that many of them were studying on their rest days. And I had lots of feedback from the Police Federation across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight before Scott had even started. Scott, obviously, as a Chief Constable in neighbouring Dorset, knew the strain anyway on the new officers. And thankfully, we were very much both on the same page there. And I do think that since the police degree, and Scott has been, the first Chief Constable in the country to launch Policing Plus, which is a new, back to the sort of core 15, 16-week core training, that the retention issues we had have dropped off massively. But it's still a tough job. And I think in terms of the number of officers that are starting and dropping off, well, Scott will cover that in a minute and tell you whether that is we're on par with the rest of the country or how it's figures now to how it was 5-10 years ago. I can't answer. That's one for Scott, really. But in terms of the volume of recruitment that's had to happen because of the National Police Uplift Programme, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have done it so many, 20,000 nationally in a 3-year period, because it does bring with it other issues like driver training and vetting and all the other pressure points you put on the force as well. So it hasn't, it has put a lot of pressure on the other support teams in police forces across the whole country. But my understanding and my belief and my knowledge is that what's going on in this force is better than other forces. We have massively overachieved on our uplift numbers, as you know, and the force has coped very, very well in consideration of the pressure put on them, and other forces have had bigger issues than we have. But if you don't mind, I'll bring Scott in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. The Commissioner's point around removing the degree has released pressure on officers, which makes their job not about writing essays on their days off and cramming extra time to try and do that. They're actually focused on policing the streets, and that actually has had a positive impact on them. The point I would make is that our figures don't show that. That's anecdotal evidence. Our figures do not show we're one of the best in the country at retaining the new officers. People talk about, generation, whatever it is. They come in, they do a job for 2 or 3 years and they leave. We're not seeing that. We're seeing people stay in policing. We're seeing them enjoy their career and develop now as we go. Every day that goes by is a day's more experience. However, the value of retention of officers is crucially important to me. Loss of experience is something that I'm concerned about, and even though we've recruited the extra 650 officers, you've got to remember a number of officers have retired and left the service for other reasons that would have done anyway. So our recruitment pipeline is double that. It's over double that, the number of people that we've had to recruit. Of course, I welcome any officers, and any increase in our establishment is good for the public. But our evidence is showing that we are retaining people. We're working with officers to understand their concerns, but they also are not leaving the service. I have read similar things in the press about other parts of the country, and that may well be true, that they've struggled to meet their targets and they've struggled to retain officers. But in Hampshire, generally, it's been a positive story.
Thank you for that. And just as a slight addition to David's question then, if we roll back 3 years, how many warranted I don't expect you to have the figures necessarily today, but if you could let us have them, how many warranted officers were there in the constabulary before this process started? And now you've gone plus 650. Is that figure now 650 more than it was? Because you mentioned recruiting double the amount kind of to stay still and move forward. I suppose the real question is, are there 650 more warranted officers now than there were 3 years ago?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we'll send the figures through to the panel for you so you've got the exact numbers. I think the key point to make is that the force has actually recruited over 1,300 people over the 3 years, because not only have they had to recruit and backfill those that have retired and just left through ill health or just not wanting to be a police officer anymore, they've also then had to have that net increase of 650 as well. So the actual recruitment has been far outweighing the 650, as I say, in excess of 1,300, but we will send you through those numbers. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, Luigi next.
Yeah, and thank you very much indeed for the reports and the updates. I've got a couple of observations, and some of them you may consider questions. I entirely agree on the website issue. Okay, there is a bit of a problem, and I know that some people who are quite scathing about Hampshire Constabulary were looking at the website from an Andover perspective and weren't quite, understanding the message that you were trying to put across. One of the things, and I think the Chief Constable very clearly mentioned it, is you've got different operating elements in a local area, like local bobbies, neighbourhood teams, response teams, and so on and so forth. Now, my view, is probably just say this is a primary police coverage. If you start going down into detail, and in some places you have mentioned all these different local bobbies, neighbourhood teams, and so on, I think you should define what they actually do, because it's causing people some confusion what they actually mean. Okay, so for example, one of the points that was raised was, well, that local bobby, if he sees, a crime, being done, next door, he's not going to do anything, because all he's going to do is attend council meetings, which isn't quite right. Okay, over it. So I do feel that we should have some explanation. In terms of the crime figures, okay, we had a new operating model, which is, as you're well aware, is I thoroughly support, and I think it's, we should have been doing this years ago. I think we were promised it years ago, but that did not occur. But even when I queried, the operating model, it will be the end of last year. Well, in Andover, for example, and I think, generally the local bobbies were nominated last week. Confidence of the police is actually quite a low ebb in terms of reporting crime. And that's what really worries me. So in terms of the focus groups and working groups we have with locals, certainly in Andover, and it may be different in other areas, there is a reluctance to report crime, okay, especially antisocial behaviour and some other things. And people tend to report crime because they want a crime reference number for insurance. So if there isn't that requirement, then, that's good. I welcome the improvements in the 101 system, but I think it will take a number, years to basically, a bit like the local bobby initiative before it works its way through. The people actually, as soon as they see a crime, they will report it to the police. There's still lots of complaints about police not investigating stuff, right? Okay. Now, my own personal view is that one of the primary roles, and you've made it quite clear, Chief Constable, is that police are actually there to investigate crimes. Okay. And that is something in the public perception we actually need to move. Because again, if there's a feeling that police do not investigate crimes, they will not report it. And a lot of it is low-level crimes. And finally, the bids for grants. I welcome very much, your initiatives. I know how difficult it is to get some organisations to bid for grants. But if you look at the geographical spread, and the organisations that do it, it always seems to be the same ones, right? Okay. So what we're finding as well locally, and it's not just on crime-related things, that you've got a number of organisations and charities who are very good at bidding for grants, right? Okay. And you've got others who are completely clueless. Now, the problem is those who are clueless quite often deliver those sort of services, Donna, that you're actually looking at delivering. And my question is, can we help these organisations to actually get better, sort of at it? And because some of them are quite clearly struggle. Okay, so you've got areas. If you do a map of Hampshire, you've got specific areas, like Andover, where basically there's nothing there. Although we know, for example, Yellow Brick Road operates, but the funding they've got is for Romsey and not for Andover. Over it. So, anyway, I think I'll shut up at that stage.
some excellent points. I'm going to cover most, and there are a couple I'm going to come back to the Chief on, if you don't mind. So thank you very much. I'll canter through it as quickly as I can. The local bobbies, making clear what they do. The Chief's here, he's heard that. It is part of their remit to go out and engage with the public and tell them exactly what it is they do. They are actually going to hold cases and investigate crime. The Chief can perhaps, one of the points he can come back on if he'd like to. They did actually start on the 1st of December. We just, because of the Christmas leave that some of them may have had, and because of the website just wanting to make sure it was absolutely up and running, that we waited until after Christmas to go live on that one. But they have actually been in post, so many of you may have already met them. And when the Chief and I have been out walking around with them over the last couple of weeks, I was in Lee Park in Battin's ward, and Ian, the PC there, walking down the road, he knew one of the street drinkers, and he's already making those bonds and those relationships as you would expect him to. Confidence in the police being low nationally, yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is why the local bobbies, this is why I wanted to bring this back, because we've got to do everything that we can here. Just because it's bad across the country doesn't mean it's acceptable. Both the Chief and I have got a vision that we want this to be the very best force in the country, the shining light, the setting the way, and therefore this is why bringing back local bobbies to really connect the public back to their police force is so key for me, for the Chief, and I know for all of you. The reluctance to report crime, absolutely. I think the reputation of the 101 service, the actual call waiting times now are really, really good, and the Chief may expand on that. But it's been for October, November, December and January. So it's been for the last 4 months. But actually, that's going to take time with trust and confidence. The public are going to phone and go, okay, that was okay. But I did have 3 occasions over the last 5 years where it's been terrible. Second time I phone in it, you get through within 1 or 2 minutes. You go, okay, 2 times now, probably maybe they have fixed it. And that's why, again, we've done some on board your point. I really, really do. Police investigating crimes, perhaps one the Chief might want to come back to in terms of actionable lines of inquiry and other things. And the grants round, yeah, we do really struggle with this. So, Kate will be able to tell you as well, being the former head of commissioning and criminal justice, which held this particular grants round pots. When the bids come in, we map the geographical, and we have actually had to proactively go out to some of those smaller charities in the extremities of the county to say, can we encourage you to put a bid in? Because it does look terrible from my perspective if all the money's going into the cities when they've actually got a lot of support through the councils, through Portsmouth City Council, Southampton City Council, and others. So we really do try and stoke to get things coming in, same as we had to with the Safer Streets round as well. That only happened because my team really worked with CSP managers in some of the smaller districts to say, you are now one of only 2 councils in the whole county that have not put a bid in. You really need to put a bid in. And in terms of bid writers, yeah, so where we've had some little, they're not even charities, they're like community interests, like a boxing club, or, we've linked them up with some of our bigger charities in other parts of the county, so they're not competing in the same geographical area, to say, look, I'm giving you quite a bit of money, Motivate, for example, can you get one of your experienced bid writers to just go and have a coffee with this charity to sit them down and explain how it should be done? And where we can, through Caroline Sargent, who works in my office, she kind of is our business manager for getting all the money out. She will also coach people and help them through as best we can, because we really do want to get the money out. And I'm grateful of you raising the point, because it's an important one.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The issue of trust and confidence is really interesting one. It's absolutely core of what we do. I mean, that's why I've made the changes that I've made. And I agree with you entirely. There's an effect that will take some time for people to believe us. Although you've got clearly evidence of people saying that, I've also got lots of evidence of saying we're seeing a difference. The police are doing warrants in areas, they're more visible, they're more connected. So we've got to make sure we understand across the whole force how people are feeling. And one of the ways that we're doing that, yesterday I had a presentation in Waterloo with the neighbourhood team there, and we're piloting something called Let's Talk, and that's basically getting people connected to Hampshire Alerts. But what we do is we survey about what are their crime problems on a very micro level, street based. What's worrying you? And we review that, and it's just a case of putting something on your phone. The police will give you updates of crimes, because we have to be realistic. You can't have you can't have an officer walking across the end down your street every single day with what they need to deal with. We've got to get trust and confidence in different ways, and we've been, and similarly holding community forums in certain places. They're really good, but try and get on Wednesday night in January, a load of people will go to a community centre to speak to the officers. They're very small numbers often, and it takes a lot of time. So we've got to find different ways of engaging and listening to our communities, particularly those communities that might not necessarily feel confident in speaking to the police. They don't trust them. They might have some deep-rooted angst about actually engaging with the police. That's what we really want to know, not necessarily the worried well. The point around 101 is right. I'll talk about that the figures in a moment when I give my update in relation to the precept. But you know, I know I was going to cover this later on, but these are facts, right? You know, since we've changed the model, and our antisocial behaviour is down nearly 18%, 3,288 less reported. We've got nearly 11% reduction in sexual offences. We've got violent crime down by 10%. We've got burglary down by 14%. And we've arrested over 1,000 more people than this time last year, which has resulted in 22% of more people getting charged and summons going before the court. We are a force that is going down, has changed. We are a force that is investigating crime and taking fight to the criminals. That's what the public expects us to see. We need time to do it. We've made the changes. We need to communicate and engage with the public better, but it won't happen overnight. But the changes are in place and the results are already starting to come through. So what we need is the support of the community, of council leaders to understand the changes that we're making and work with the community so that they feel confident based upon what they see. So I do realise that we've started from a disappointing position in terms of the force performance before I came in, but things are changing, and hopefully we'll be sat around this table in a year's time and those figures will give you more assurance to give your communities back that the police actually are doing something different, and that is all predicated on the additional numbers that have been given to be able to change that focus. In terms of investigating crime, I've been very clear from day one. I was very clear when I was a Chief Constable in Dorset as well. Every police officer will investigate crime. Whether you're a neighbourhood officer, whether you're a specialist officer that deals with child protection, whether even call handlers, when they take that call, they are investigating the crime right from the very start. I've got a programme where we're taking officers, we're giving them specialist additional training, and we have to do it because they haven't had it previously, about how to investigate crime. And you think, well, why do you need to do that? Well, because I'm not confident that they've necessarily got the skills to be able to do it. I am confident we've got very capable specialist investigators, but if your job has been about engagement and it's not been about investigating crime, you need to be taught how to do it. So we're doing that. I've got specialist officers in each of the districts working with them to improve the standards of what they do. The Deputy Chief Constable has made changements to the force performance structure and holding people to account for investigating crimes right down to a PC level. We're looking at very basic things about reasonable lines of inquiry, making sure that we can get the technology in to access, you know, CCTV in a way that isn't a mechanical way where somebody has to go and recover it and then analyse it. We're looking at facial recognition. We're looking at investing in intelligence and analysis so we identify those prolific offenders so that officers, when they go out there, they know who they're targeting, they know who the criminals are in their area, and they take action against it. If you consider as well, we're part of a justice system, and that justice system includes the CPS and the courts, and we're putting pressure and working well. But them in terms of things like court capacity, the more people we arrest, the more people I want charged and the more people I want before the court. What I can't have is blockages in the system, which means I arrest more people, we produce more evidence, and we don't actually get the convictions that the public expect. But at the same time, community-based policing is the way that we keep young people out of crime and we make people feel safe. And we started that journey with the name Bobbies, with the additional officers that we've put in. Nearly every officer that I've been given since I've been appointed has been put into frontline community policing. That's what the public asks for, and that's what we're doing. So, but we need to get the message right, and that's why I absolutely take your point around how the public feel. They need to feel safe as well as be safe. They are safer now, generally, than what they were last year, but they need to feel it, and that'll take a bit of time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more question because, of course, the presentation on the precept is going to allow plenty more time for questions as well. That's Matt, and then we'll move on to the precept presentation.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Donna. As always, you've given us a whistle-stop tour of what you've been doing. I've got a few different comments, if that's okay, around some of those different pieces, because you did cover quite a lot. I guess one of my first questions is on the 101. I think it's good to see an improvement in that space. I think you're right. We need to have a prolonged period of that so that we can see the confidence to start to rise in that space. Are you concerned at all about extra calls off the back of the advertising that there's now less waiting time? So that's just something to consider. Is there likely to be an uplift in some of those non-police related calls before the messaging calms down? I'd like to welcome the piece of work that you've done with the VRU across the HIP space. I think that's been really excellent. It was a great event to attend the other day. It was a pleasure to sign up to that, and I genuinely believe that wheel and spoke approach to working with CSPs locally on the ground is a good way forward, and I think that makes a lot of sense to pull those resources where we can. So I'd just like to thank you for that piece of work and your team that worked behind that as well. Also, I think welcome the more ASB money and look forward to when that grant funding becomes available. I know in Southampton, again, that's something we're very interested in trying to tackle on the streets. And having said that, we have seen some improved police engagement with communities through packed meetings, police and community together meetings, etc. Within the city. So again, I welcome some of that work that's going on. There's a bit of a challenge around, I think at the moment, Southampton, the CSPs and some of us are picking up the cost for some of those PAC meetings at the moment in terms of organising that. Part of that is the way in which we're looking to work with our community engagement officers within the city. So that's not a bad thing necessarily, but I wouldn't mind just having a further conversation around that. I agree with your assessment on the domestic abuse and the violence against women and girls piece. I think it's good that we're seeing additional reports in that space. I think we need to continue to highlight that, and I would make a call to anyone that is a victim of domestic abuse or any form of violence, be that in the nighttime economy or any other point, to continue to come forward and to make that case that women do that. This is a gendered-based crime, and it's very important that we continue to support that. I also welcome the named Bobby. I think that's great that we've got someone dedicated in a local space. I am a little bit concerned about the prevalence of the naming of those individuals. My concern again is around the amount of correspondence those individuals may receive. I think most of us would really like to see them on the street, getting to know the people in the space. I don't want them to end up becoming bogged down answering emails. So I guess that's to Scott in terms of how he feels those individuals are going to be able to manage that effectively. I think that's a really important space for them to be in. And then I also really welcome the proactive engagement you're having with shadow cabinet members. And as Scott mentioned earlier, you talked about the courts and the justice piece being the back end of all of those convictions and making sure that sort of process begins to catch up to some extent. I think we all are aware of some of the challenges in the justice space currently. Did you have? And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Matt. Obviously, there's a lot there which I hope we'll deal with very briefly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Renyard. So the 101, yeah, we just got to carry on, trust and confidence in the service. The extra calls coming in because we're advertising the wait times have gone down, probably inevitable, but actually the wait times are so good now. I mean, literally, I think the other day the wait time was like 50 seconds, 30 seconds at points. We were in there for an hour at the opening of the new contact management centre in Portsmouth 2 days ago, and we were looking at the screen and it was like 0, 0, 0, 0 for 999 calls outstanding, 101 calls outstanding, and time to wait on both of them. So there's 4 parts to the screens are all around. Well, you've been in there, you've seen it. And we were like, I just literally could not believe it. And it was pretty much consistent like that for the hour that we were there. So either they'd turn the phones off, no, I'm only joking, or, but it was very, very good. I was very impressed with what we saw. And the staff are feeling very happy as well about it. They've got pride in what they're doing. VRU, so thank you for coming to that event in Hedge End at King's Church last week. We cannot do the work of the Violent Reduction Unit without CSPs, without local authorities. We don't know what you know, your staff, what they're doing. It's absolutely vital. And the relationship between the CSPs and the Violent Reduction Unit managers is really strong, really good, and I'm incredibly grateful. Your council particularly, of course, you've got lots of complexity in Southampton, but, you know, you are really doing some great work in so many areas. And, you know, the work at the policing team, Scott's, superintendent, your district commander, Phil Lamb, you know, probably the biggest and most robust town centre policing team that's been launched over, as you'll be aware, over the last 6 months. Your hub, I met with the Prince's Trust last week who are doing a pilot with you around youngsters, you know, teenagers, sort of 14 to 18, 19-year-olds who are in the criminal justice system, and working out of your hub with the pilot they're running, the Prince's Trust. I'm looking to copy what you're doing across other parts of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight because of what's going on in Southampton. And yesterday, for example, I spent, you know, a large part of yesterday with Chris Brown, one of your senior managers, because he sits on the homicide board that I chair, the homicide review board, I should say. This is reviewing, clearly I'm not leading homicides themselves, but the serious case reviews that come off the back of both domestic homicides and also other near misses and other homicides. And also then we had the drugs partnership board again, which is absolutely key with public health directors, particularly in the upper tier authorities. Safer streets, yep, I won't cover that one because of time. The facial recognition pilot that's going on in Southampton with your nighttime economy up in Bedford Place, run by a company called Reveal, was supported by Southampton Senate University and Hampshire Constabulary. It's really welcome. It's one of the first in the country that's going on at the moment. The policing minister loves it. We're getting kudos for that. Vorg Point, yes, you're right. We do need to keep highlighting the fact that come forward. Another reason I think there's been an upturn is because the Crown Court delays that we had over the previous 2 years have now got back to more or less BAU for them now in the Crown Courts, and therefore victims are not having to wait as long, and that's a key point. The retention of the victim's engagement in the criminal justice process, the court delays had a massive issue with victims dropping off, and the fact that the Chief Constable's team have got their RVR, that remote video recording that you'll remember I've told you about before, where victims can give their statement and evidence to somebody on a video link now rather than a police car turning up outside your house or having to go into a police station, which for some of them has been a significant barrier. Final comment from me, local bobbies, yes, the volume of work, one the chief might want to come back to in a minute. They've got phones, they work on the go, emails, they're doing loads of stuff as they're going around. They are absolutely focused on engagement. And the shadow cabinet work, yeah, I mean, working with Yvette, this is my, I've met with Yvette several times because of the national space, but actually meeting with her for this basis on a sort of one-to-one, sitting down, going through, it's not one-to-one, she's got advisors and people with her. And her new chief advisor, who is basically her chief of staff now, is a guy called Danny Shaw, who's an ex-BBC journalist who a load of us know and have worked with for a number of years. So he was in contact with me straight after the meeting finished about some stuff. The same with Shabana Mahmood and as Shadow Lord Chancellor, some of the ideas that she's got. And what I've had to do as chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, I need to represent Labour and Conservative PCCs, not just Conservative ones, and the same goes for working with, it's in my interest and the national policing interest, so I'm meeting with Yvette and Shabana, so is the chair of the National Police Chief Council Gavin Stevens, so is the Chief Executive of the College of Policing, Andy Marsh, so is the Chief Inspector of Constabularies, Andy Cook, so the four of us as national police leaders are working with, a potential incoming government, because we can't have an absolute nothing for a number of months. They need to, if their new government is formed, they need to be able to hit the ground running. And so it's absolutely imperative that we don't have any hiatus in the policing world. So they've told me they're working with me on some things ahead of the Labour Party are publishing their manifesto, I think just after the 10th of February. But the 10th of February is their cut-off date where they need to get everything done and prepared. So that's been part of my national role. Thank you. Chief, do you want to come back in, Scott, or not, or anything? No.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of item 7. I'm now going to move to item 8, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner 2024-2025 precept. Just got a little preamble that I need to read to you on this. We've received the Police and Crime Commissioner's proposed precept for 24-25 and supporting financial information. Under the Police and Crime Panel's regulations of 2012, we are now required to review the proposed precept. At the end of the discussion, I will invite members to vote on whether or not they support the Commissioner's proposed precept. Also, whether they wish to veto the proposal, that would need to be supported by a 2/3 majority of the panel members. I've done my arithmetic, Donna, and we've only got 13 members here. We need 14 to veto your precept. So if you want to clear off now, you can. Because we can't actually stop you, but I'm sure you will want to explain it and take questions. So that's the legal situation. We would need 14 members and we have 13. But that's not to say we would have done it anyway. We will then be required to formally report our decision to the Commissioner, which may include any recommendations. The PCC is required to have regard to the panel's report, including any recommendations, and provide a response to the panel and publish her response by the 15th of February. Unless a veto decision has been reached, well, it won't be, the Commissioner will then issue her precept. So now we're going to hear from the Commissioner and her team, along with the Chief Constable. So over to you, Donna.
Thank you very much, panel. We're going to try and keep this as succinct as we can. We know that you have a lot of questions to get through, and whether there is a legal veto able to pass today, I want to walk out of this room with your support and confidence. It means a huge amount to me because you represent all of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So I would, I will be very much taking a note of everything you're saying in terms of your feedback. I just want to, before I hand over to Richard, to say that this is obviously Richard Croucher's first budget leading here, representing both the Chief Constable and myself as both of our Chief Finance Officers. Which is a really welcome move from both the Chief and I. It makes life very much easier. And the proposal is that Richard will take you through the presentation. The Chief is then going to give you an update. I'm going to summarise a few comments and then we'll be back to you if that's okay. Thank you.
Morning, panel. Thank you for the opportunity to have the briefings in December on the process, as the Chair mentioned earlier, and then the further briefing last week on some of the numbers. I'm just going to run through some of those numbers for people that weren't able to make it, or a short recap for those that were able to make it on Friday. There's a couple of additions there based on feedback that we had on Friday. But the main content that I want to run through today is the grant settlements. That's obviously a big factor in what we can afford going forwards. The public consultation on the precept, the Chief's view on the precept, and he'll say more about that later. And then I'll talk about what the precept proposal is. We'll look at the inflation assumptions that are in the budget, the revenue budget growth position, the capital expenditure, and what that means for our reserves on our treasury management. And finally, I'll touch on the medium term, which is always relevant as well. So in terms of the actual grant itself, we're showing at the bottom line there a total increase of grant of 18.6 million, which is 7.3%. So on the face of it, that sounds like a very healthy increase in grants. And we do welcome that increase in grants. It will be enormously helpful to provide excellent policing services into 24-25. However, within that, there are some things to be aware of. And if I look at this slide, in here, what I've done is to say, actually remember that within that increase, there's 6.8 million extra money for pension grants. And all that does is that represents the increase in the employer's pension contribution rate, which is going to be incurred from 24-25. So whilst there's an extra 6.8 million in the grant for that, which is enormously welcome because it would give us challenges if there weren't that level of increase, actually that's not new money that we could spend on new things. It is fully committed. Similarly, the pay award. So the pay award was announced in September. The government were very good in giving all police forces extra money to assist with the pay award, but that was with effect from September. So for 24-25, we've got a full 12 months of cost to cover. And so £4.8 million of that increase relates to the increase in the pay award grant, just based on the fact that in 23-24, we've received 7 months of funding, and in 24-25, we have to receive 12 months of funding to cover the whole year. And then the final point I'll make is just a recategorisation. And so within the uplift numbers, there is an extra 3.1 million in total grant for additional recruitment, but actually 2.9 million of that 3.1 we're actually already receiving in the current financial year. So in this year, it's been what's called a batch 2 target, and we've had to apply for that number, and we have to achieve a certain headcount by the 31st of March to be able to receive that amount of money in this year. But actually, as long as we receive that amount of money, then in fact, actually we'll get that money in this year, and the whole 3.1 isn't all new money in next year. Some of it is money that we've already had in this year to help with uplift numbers as well. So what that tells us is actually, in terms of the underlying increase, it's much more in the region of sort of 4 million, 1.6. And if I go back to that slide, what you'll see therefore is that where we've got increases for uplift grants, those are covered off by expected increase. And the core grant itself, which is the top line, is an increase of 2%. And so that's more in the region of where we'd expect core grants to increase. It gives us some issues for future years as well. And so uplift funding, of course, can be clawed back if we don't meet our headcount targets. And so there's quite a substantial amount of funding in that uplift category. We've also got no commitment ongoing for those uplift numbers. And so the Minister is supportive of them. We hope that they're ongoing. We're planning for them to be ongoing, but there is no commitment because they're not in the core grants. And so anything which is outside of those core grants is subject to annual decision making from government. And it's also potentially subject to no inflation increases. So you'll note that things outside of core grant haven't always got an inflation increase from year to year. So there's some potential financial risk for us there going forwards if more of the funding sits outside of the core grant going forwards. And crucially, on grant settlement, I will mention to the panel that, of course, the funding formula review, which was a commitment for this Parliament, there's no further progress on that. There's no sign of any consultation coming anytime soon on a new formula, and that is something that we would welcome because we expect Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to do better out of any funding formula. I'll come on to the reasons why shortly. In terms of the precept then, so in order to inform the precept proposal, the Commissioner undertook a consultation and received over 6,000 responses to that consultation. Broadly, you can see there the results were almost sort of split across each of those categories. Overall, the takeaways were that 64% of the respondents to that question agreed with an increase in precept, but actually a notable one I will show you, so 31% raised the point of no increase at all. And so that echoed previous thoughts that we'd heard from the public and from the panel in some cases as well around the cost of living pressures. So something for the Commissioner to bear in mind when she's reaching her view around the precept proposal. We have the operational statement, which is in Appendix A, and so that is the Chief Constable's view around precept levels. And of course, the Chief Constable is in favour of a £13 maximum Band D precept increase to support policing. We know that many other PCCs around the country will be given £13, and therefore, as police forces are shown against each other in terms of performance, it is relevant that our funding is lower than some other forces. So that is a relevant factor. But more importantly for us, actually, that additional funding can deliver extra services for the public in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And so to the precept proposal then. So the actual proposal is £10 for Band D. The referendum limit maximum is £13. But the £10 proposal, which is 3.98%, balances the views of the public. It balances the views of the Chief Constable as well. Considers those operational requirements both now and into the future, but appreciates the cost of living pressures that we've heard about. And we're seeing inflation at the moment as well, as you've all seen, is 4% as well. And so the proposal at 3.98% is very much in line with current inflation. Of course, as you know, panel, actually the Band D number, which is what council tax referendum limit is set at £13, actually that's relevant for Band D council tax payers, but in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, the majority of council tax payers are in bands A to C, and so we're still seeing 61% of those people paying less than the £10. And we have a chart on the next page which just shows what that means for in actual pounds and pence times for those individuals in each of those categories. So you'll see there, sort of £10 on Band D is actually less for A, B and C, and where that's where the majority of people will be paying their council tax. And just a comparison of where we sit nationally within police forces in England. And so what you'll see there is that we're below the average currently, and this is all in the current financial year, 23-24. So at £251, we're below the national average. Actually, £10 takes us more or less to what the national average is in this year, £261. And so it's very likely that even the £10 increase will not bring Hampshire and the Isle of Wight above the national average for council tax precept. And I said I'd come back to our overall funding position. So this is a chart which HMIC FRS produce when comparing forces' financial positions. Overall, our level of funding per head of population, we always seem to find ourselves in the bottom 3 in the country, and that's a combination of the amount of grant that we receive and also our precept, our local council tax, being below the average as well. And so that always puts us in a relatively difficult funding position compared to other forces around the country. And you can see on that chart that there's some forces there are receiving quite a lot more per head of population. And one more point on the council tax is that in terms of the grant increases we receive and the council tax increase, what we see is from 23-24 to 24-25, the actual share, so the balance of overall funding between council tax and grant hasn't changed very much. And so the council tax has gone from being 42% to 41%, so it's broadly similar to the current situation. But I've put a note at the bottom there just to recognise that this has changed quite a lot since 2010-2011, because actually it was a 2/3, 1/3 split, with grant being 2/3 of that amount when we first started this process. So where does that leave us in terms of the budget summary then? So this overall budget summary, of course, most of the money goes to the constabulary, and so that's 417 million of the total amount going to the constabulary. That's 90% of the overall funding that's available. And within that figure as well, it's also worth noting that within the constabulary's budget, and you'll see that in Appendix D, 75% of that constabulary expenditure goes on people costs. And so a large amount of that money is going on people, and the largest part of that is frontline police officers. Inflation assumptions. So in building the budget, we've had to make some inflation assumptions. We've taken these from government documents, but also the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is an independent group which is forecasting what the inflation should be in future years. We ourselves, I think other members have pointed out that we think that people have been surprised by the level of inflation last year, and so 2% does present some risk for us. So we've put some sensitivity analysis around that to say, actually, should there be an increase in inflation which is above that, just for us to be aware of, then a 1% difference on the amount of pay budget that we'd have to find would cost us £2 million, and a 1% on non-pay would cost us 0.7 million. And so to be aware of that, within our reserves, we do have an inflation risk reserve as well, should there be a need to deal with any excesses of inflation compared to what we provided for within the budget. The 2.5% figure there for the pay award, which, as we said, a lot of the budget is on police pay as well, that is based on our conversations with the Minister around the Home Office's willingness to be able to contribute to a pay award should it be more than 2.5%. Again, there's no guarantee around that. It's a budget assumption based on that intelligence. It's what most other PCCs and forces are using around the country as well for that purpose. But we do have that risk reserve in place just in case the inflation is higher than is forecast. And the budget also allows for some growth, so quite considerable growth, so another £12.4 million worth of growth. Underlying growth, so the amount that's in the base budget going forwards is that sort of 7.8 figure on the top, raising higher on the ongoing budget, so further investment for the future as well, and not just a large amount of one-off costs in that budget growth. And what that means is a lot of that growth is around people. And so you've heard that actually the police officer numbers going up by 75, there's a breakdown there of where you'll find those 75. They're all listed separately in Appendix E as to say where those actually growth money is going, but that's a summary of those 75. And of course, we also talked about the briefing, the importance of police staff as well, and 45 police staff, notably into intelligence function, more people into front counters as well to improve accessibility of police stations. Picked out just some key headlines, so the full list of all of the growth is in Appendix E. I've just picked out some of the key points here, so some of the larger amounts. So firstly, the larger investment in local policing, and that's an extra 30 sergeants and 20 PCs going into local policing. Intelligence we spoke about, so we've invested in our frontline. Actually, what we're hearing now is actually those frontline officers need more intelligence at the centre. They need to understand what the risks and the opportunities are within their communities, and the demand for intelligence is far outstripping our current intelligence provision, which is well below what it used to be, and it's a level which we haven't reinvested in post-austerity. We've been focusing on reinvesting in those frontline officers, and actually now we need to make the most of those frontline officers through an investment in intelligence. Offender management, so MOSAVO is the acronym, so that's the most serious offenders who come back out of prisons into our community require management. So people who've committed serial sex offences or violent offences, those people need to be managed. It's an important part of what policing do, obviously in partnership with organisations such as probation as well, but we need to increase our numbers there to make sure that we're managing those people when they come back into our community. Front counters, you're all aware of the pledges that the Commissioner has made around opening up more front counters for policing to be more visible and more accessible to the public. And so as well as the capital investment in buildings, there's provision there for additional staff within front counters. Vehicle replacement, we've seen a significant increase in the price of vehicles. It's really important that our officers are able to get to where they need to quite quickly. We are estimating that our annual expenditure on vehicles is likely to increase to something around £5 million a year. This provides an extra contribution towards that so that we can meet those demands to keep our 1,100 vehicles on the roads and making the officers able to get to where they need to be. We see future pressures on vehicle prices as well in the future, and I'll come back to that as a medium-term comment. And then the last big one there was network modernisation. Our network is due for contract renewal. There's an opportunity there if we invest now to get a better deal that can provide us with a better service going forwards. In terms of capital, we spoke about the capital situation there. So you'll see the capital plan is mostly on estates and then a smaller amount on vehicles each year. So the estate investment is needed. There's an estate strategy coming, as you're aware. That will require a lot of investment to make sure that the officers in the new area model are located in the places that they need to be to best meet the needs and demands of the communities that they're serving. And so some of that estate expenditure, which was coming from reserves, was paused until the area model was completed to understand where the officers and staff needed to be to service those demands and to be able to put that into process. That is going to take a few years to do all of that building work. So an estate strategy will be coming to show you exactly where that money is being invested. Importantly there, realise that there is no capital grant for any police forces around the country. And so all the money that we spend on capital, we have to find from other places. And that means reserves is obviously the place that we go to avoid having to borrow, and borrowing costs have gone up. Within the 3-year period set out there, we are not expecting to have to go into any new borrowing. And the big advantage of that is that if we've gone into borrowing and interest rates go up, then that's a hit on your revenue budget and requires you to make savings in order just to balance your budget. We're not in that situation in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And a big reason for that is the reserve. So we say no capital grant, so we need to actually make sure that we've got enough money to deliver this large estates programme that is required. We've got relatively low revenue funding. As you've seen, we're kind of one of the lowest funded force on revenue ability, so we need to make sure that we're setting aside provision each year for things that need replacing. So we know that computers need replacing and phones need replacing, vehicles need replacing. We're making provision for that year on year, and we put that money into reserves so it can be spent on those replacements. We can't absorb big hits from one year to the next, and so when we have a big body armour rollout requirement, so we have a lot of body armour reaching its 10-year warranty period, that's a £2 million replacement programme. We can't find £2 million in a year. We make contributions throughout the period to build up our equipment reserves so that we're able to replace those body armour units when we need to. We also put IT project costs into reserves, so we don't hand any approved budget for IT straight over to IT for projects. We wait to receive a final business case to make sure it's in delivery, and some of that is because we reprioritise what we ask IT to do sometimes within the year as well. So we don't want to initially hand out money where actually when we get round to doing this project, some of the costs might change, some of the solutions might change because IT is a particularly fast-changing environment that does have a lot of cost attached to it. We don't have any devolved budgets. All the budgets are managed by finance, and so we're able to take any opportunities to harvest underspends where they occur and use those for the highest corporate need. And we expect reserves to reduce over the medium term, and you'll see that as we set out sort of the reserve schedule going forward in the report. So because of the outlay expected on estates in particular, we'll see that amount coming down. So there won't be so much in reserves in the medium term. I've just highlighted a couple of lines there to say actually within what looks like a large number for reserves, actually a large amount of it is for estate, and that will be utilised as the building estate strategy is put into action over the next few years. And then the next biggest amount is IT, a considerable amount as well. And again, that will be used up as those IT projects are delivered as well. And so we do see those reserves are likely to come down over the next few years. And then finally, just to check on Treasury management. So no new borrowing required. So no expected breaches or challenges in the meeting our requirements around Treasury management. And of course, we don't become overly reliant on income streams. That's proved to be a dangerous thing for some other local authorities. Although we are receiving good returns on our investments at the moment because of our level reserves and the increase in interest rates, actually we don't want to become overly reliant on that because that could change, and particularly as we expect to spend some of those reserves. And in the medium term, said we touch on this just briefly, we are showing some medium term gaps in the future. They are based on some funding assumptions there which are probably pessimistic. We hope that we receive higher amounts of funding than that, but nevertheless it's sensible to budget on a prudent basis. But a couple of things just to pick out. So I mentioned police officers, huge increase in the number of police officers as you've been hearing. You'll see there the increments. So this is not inflation for pay awards. This is just the increments as people progress through the pay scales. The amount that those increments go up by on a year-on-year basis jump considerably at pay point 5, 6 and 7 for constables. And so this will be a problem for police forces around the country as they get a bulge of new police officers through the uplift programme, suddenly hitting those pay increases. And you can see in the penultimate column to the right there that you're looking at increases normally of around 4% for the first few years. And then that goes up to nearer 8% and then into double figures for those hires. So that is something for us to be aware of, that our ability to fund those increments needs to be there in future years as more of those police officers progress through those pay points. And then on the medium term as well, we talked about the need to increase in vehicles now, but also the sustainability agenda is going to require significant investment in the infrastructure, and that might need to happen quite soon. And that will require charging points, which requires new power supplies, which requires us in some cases to buy premises where we're leasing them at the moment. And so quite a big infrastructure requirement there. We need to understand what government's plans are around that as well, how much we'll need to provide ourselves. But also the ongoing cost of buying those vehicles is likely to increase. So currently we're seeing electric vehicle prices be around about £20,000 per unit higher than our existing vehicles. So that could cause an increase. We do hope that alternatives to electric vehicles will come forward in the next few years. And we also hope that the cost of electric vehicles decreases as more and more people buy electric vehicles and the technology becomes a bit easier for manufacturers to put those vehicles into place at a lower cost. So we are hopeful that those costs will come down, but nevertheless we need to be aware of that as another potential medium-term pressure, as we don't actually have any capital grant or no suggested funding from government at the moment. We need to understand how we're going to meet all of those challenges with those significant infrastructure costs. So that was the summary for me, so I'll hand back.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Richard. So the way in... Yeah, no, what I was going to say was the way I propose to handle this is first we will have questions, just pure questions please, no debate, matters of elucidation that will help you, and then we'll move to debate and focus upon the recommendations. So Donna, did you have a point?
We haven't finished our presentation yet, so the Chief and I have still got our comments to come, if that's okay.
So sorry, some people are getting very, very
We won't
keen.
be long, I promise you.
All right. Well, you carry on then, but members are now aware of how we'll handle the process once you finish.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. You've seen in Appendix A, the papers were submitted before, which is my operational statement that I make to Police and Crime Commissioner. I don't intend to read it all out, I just intend to reinforce the key points. You will recollect that when I was appointed, it was about this time last year, my focus very much was about community policing, bringing police officers back to the street, which actually was in accordance with the Police and Crime Commissioner's policing plan. And the changes that we've made so far and the funding that was provided have been significant. So we have gone very much into a local policing model with neighbourhood officers based in local communities, opening up police stations, opening up front counters, taking detectives out of central hubs and putting them in their communities. We've now got neighbourhood enforcement teams. We've got increased neighbourhood policing teams. I've got more proactive resources targeting prolific offenders and strengthening our rural policing with additional officers going into our rural team. I could go on. Town centre units have been launched in some of the key cities, and we've, in terms of the volume, but the emphasis very much is about protecting our public in their communities. I mentioned the figures earlier on. So has that been successful or not? Well, longevity will tell us that, but I will repeat those figures. So far, we know that antisocial behaviour is down significantly, nearly 18%. 444 fewer serious sexual offences, violence, over 5,000 fewer serious violence offences, so that's down 10%, and 807 fewer burglaries. But it's not just about the crime statistics, it's about bringing offenders to justice. So we've taken, up until the point of this report being written, over 1,000 more people brought into custody. I've launched 3 phases of Operation Relentless, 2 phases of Operation Relentless, which is just focusing a very targeted, proactive operation in our communities, bringing those wanted people, bringing those people that are committing burglaries, bringing those people that are committing violence before the courts. The net result of that is we've had 22% increase in charged summons of offenders. So we are arresting more burglars, more rapists, more sexual offenders and more violent people significantly than we were doing last year. Shoplifting is a real concern of mine. We've had an increase in reporting of broadly 25%, which I encourage, because we are now putting measures in place to make it easier for those businesses that are affected to report it. But importantly, we had a 78% increase in arrests and charged summons for those individuals, and we will be looking next year as to how we can further improve our relationship with business owners and the retail community. We mentioned 101 calls. I don't intend to go over that in great depth, just to pull off a couple of the headlines. When I came here, we were talking sometimes 3 or 4 hours of people waiting to pick up the phone, and what was happening, people were dropping the call, abandoning the call. Well, we don't know what they were calling about, people at risk. And so now with there was also 80 vacancies in our call centre, which is really significant. We now, you can count on one hand the number of vacancies that we've got. We've already got recruitment plans to take us through the summer, which is our busiest period. We've opened up the Portsmouth call centre as well. And our 101 calls for this month are averaging at 1 minute 58. Sometimes they're down to a few seconds. Occasionally it might be a few more minutes on our busiest periods. But that's what the public quite rightfully expect. That's what the Commissioner tasked me with dealing with. So the investment that we put in place in contact is starting to make real significant improvements. Opening up police stations is key to my strategy of delivering local policing to local communities. As the Commissioner mentioned a moment ago, we opened up Ryde the other day. We've got Portsmouth Central, Park Gate, Petersfield, Yateley, Totton, all coming down the line, and the estate strategy that my team are working along with the Commissioner's team on to improve the estate that we've got, but to make it more accessible for the public. But importantly, that goes with that, my officers can be based in the communities and not miles away, travelling to respond to calls, and that's really important. One thing we invested in, and I'm grateful for the Commissioner's support, is the provision of area cars. These are the vehicles that we used to have in the force that were dedicated to be the fast response, to get on scene and deal with incidents, but also to be proactive and intelligence gatherers. They've been launched across the whole county now, and they exist. So we're bolstering not just neighbourhood teams, but our response teams with specialist skills and specialist capabilities. The local Bobby scheme is the start. Both the Commissioner and I have got ambitions as to how we can strengthen that. I need more officers to be able to do that. That is part of the bid, particularly around sustaining, and there is a commitment, we haven't made that clear, that officers will be in there for a minimum of 2 years, but sustaining those numbers of local community officers is really important to all of our communities, and fundamentally the neighbourhood policing that we're delivering now is the bedrock of policing within the constabulary. Of course, what people don't see is beyond that, the specialist officers dealing with rape victims, approach to violence against women and girls, child protections, cybercrime, people targeting our children online from overseas for sexual purposes and sexual gratification, complex fraud that is now being targeted against those people that previously would have been somebody knocking on their door and doing a scam. They're now accessing it through computers and cyber. So the vulnerability of our communities is greater, and of course the changing nature of our communities. The diversity and the richness of diversity we've seen across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight means it's incredibly important that we do, to the point that was made earlier, we work even harder at getting the trust and confidence in all of our communities to report crime. So, but that all has to be done, I recognise, in a financial envelope, and that is the real challenge. Without reiterating too much what Richard said, but you know, the Welcome Pay Award put pressures on the force. It wasn't all covered through government costs. We had to pick up significant costs from that. The increase of services, bills, rents, fuels, licenses, everything that you're all feeling in your, you know, in your own home, we're feeling at an organisational level, and one that is 24/7, where fuel costs have gone up, vehicle costs have gone up, heating, lighting, all of that to run an organisation of our size are significant increases. The force also needs to, as Richard alluded to, we need to keep on top of the criminals in relation to the use of technology, and that is expensive. And some of that is about the sort of base infrastructure that we need. You know, the bandwidth, the technical platforms that our systems are housed needs to be refreshed and updated, because we become vulnerable, and we know that we, like many other organisations, are subject to the same cyber attack from state-sponsored countries abroad, and that obviously, if that happened in Hampshire, that will be a significant concern for the public. So making sure our systems are secure, but also investing in the right type of technology so we can capture more criminals. And as we increase police officer numbers, we need more vehicles, we need more uniforms, we need more body armour, we need, you know, more infrastructure. We need it all increases. But if we're doing it and we're getting the right results for the public, we're confident that if we do get this increase in budget next year, we'll continue on that trajectory. The management of serious and violent sex offenders and the increased budget that I need for that, I cannot underestimate. There are some very dangerous people out there that need to be monitored in the community, that have committed some of the most horrific crimes, and those numbers are increasing. And we do work closely with probation, but we can't have these people not going unchecked, not being visited, not being monitored, and that has fallen largely on the police to pick up the majority of that increase. Dealing with vetting and my professional standards department has been a real focus for us as well. You have read a lot in the press recently about officers, some in Hampshire and in other parts of the countries, being subject to misconduct proceedings. We need to, and we have, bolstered our vetting teams to make sure that we recruit well, we review that within the timely scales that we need to do. And we also have done something called the data wash. So what we've done as part of a national approach as well is check that all of our officers, there's no intelligence around them, that we understand what the current state of play is. But it's incredibly important from a trust and confidence point of view that the investment in professional standards department continues, so that we are as ethical and understanding as we possibly can regarding the conduct of some a very, very small number of officers. My view is very clear. The operational case is made out for £13. I'm going to ask, I have asked the Commissioner for the maximum precept. I do, however, recognise the cost of living crisis. I do, however, recognise the pressures on the public purse. And so, although it would be remiss of me not to ask for the full amount, that's what I need to protect the public as best I can. It's a case of how fast and how hard I go in making the reforms needed to make sure that we are one of the safest, we are the safest two counties in the country. But having said that, I do recognise the pressures that the public are facing on cost of living. So I'm not going to say any more at the moment, other than just to finally say the increase in my request for increase in council precept to support me funding the operational plan has been subject to significant scrutiny over the past months, working with the Commissioner and the finance team. There's a very clear plan about where that money will be spent. It is, as you've seen on one of the slides of Richard's, largely going into those frontline services, but it is all about fighting crime and keeping people safe. There are no luxuries in there. It is all about keeping the public safe, and it has been scrutinised heavily by the Commissioner to get to this point. So that's all I'd like to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Donna, would you like to wind up.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. So you've heard comprehensive presentation from Richard as the CFO and from the Chief Constable on the need and the justification. As we've said, 64% of people support a council tax increase, and of course I represent the public, but I'm also mindful of the 31% that didn't. That's, you know, it's not an insignificant number of people that said they wanted there to be a freeze, and I've had to be mindful of that as well. I have to balance this the same as you do in your councils with the cost of living crisis, and that's really why I settled at the 3.98%. Perhaps there may be some questions on that, so I won't dwell more. It is 83 pence a month for Band D, but it would be remiss of me not to point out that 61% of the homes across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are actually in Bands A to C, so they will pay less than 83 pence. I've spoken to you before about the Treasury management approach that I've always taken since I've been in an elected role, pulling on the strength of my professional background in banking and understanding economics. And I did give you some predictions of what I thought was going to happen to inflation some 2 years ago and last year, and periodically in that intermittent period as well. And actually we are down to virtually, I think, what I said a couple of years ago, which was around it being about 4% within about 18 months. And I think we're currently at 3.8%, 3.7%. So we do talk about these things all the time to make sure that our look ahead is absolutely correct and that we're not carrying undue risk by being maybe too overzealous in what we think is going to happen. You heard from Richard about our council tax being £251.46 for the policing element, with the average being £261.27, and therefore we are a very good value for money police force, and we have had national recognition from that from HMIC. Pay inflation at 2.5% is something we have to do, but that comes on a solid foundation of an indication from the Home Office that if they do award a pay rise of 4%, 5%, 6%, they will fund, we are hoping, beyond 2.5%, and all police forces in the country and police and crime commissioners are currently basing their budgets on that 2.5% for staff. We have built in the South East Area Allowance. So if you remember before, previously when Olivia Pinckney was our Chief Constable, we increased it to £1,100. We've now raised that up to the £2,000. That has cost us under £2 million a year. Constrain, but it is important because of the retention points we heard earlier about not wanting to lose police officers to the Met and to other areas. 2,000 is the maximum that we can pay here as a outer London, Greater London, and we're not a donut force, we're like one away from a donut force, as they call it, to London. The extra £1 million going into the fleet takes the fleet budget up to £4 million. As Richard said, it needs to be 5, it has been 3, so we are taking a big step towards reducing the current strain and deficit that we have in the fleet budget to make sure that we can carry on paying for vehicles. And through this budget, we've been able to put some money as a one-off into driver training to make sure that we have got the maximum number of police officers able to drive on blues and twos for the Chief's team, because we don't want them to have to be driving at 30 miles an hour if they're on a grade 1 response. So making sure that they get through driver training quickly has been a priority. So finally, from me, 498 police officers were funded through the government, 600 I pledged to you, if you remember, and they were delivered through 2021 and 22. 50 I pledged this time last year, and the 50th person of that 650 will be recruited by April of this year. In this budget, I'm recommending to you an additional 75 police officers, and you heard the specialism and the need and the why from the Chief. That takes us to a net increase of 725 from January 2020. Which is really important. I'd like to say thank you to Kate Boyton, who is here, who is the Deputy Section 151 officer, to Richard and to the force for their support in putting this budget together. And Chair, panel members, I recommend my budget to you for the year 2024-2025.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Donna. So as I said earlier, we're now going to move to questions, not statements, please. We'll have a chance for that in a debate. So this is literally questions of elucidation of the presentations that you've heard. And I saw Simon's hand go up first. So Simon will ask the first question.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I will resist the challenge as far as making statements when I ask questions. Very difficult, councillors, we know. Donna, I appreciate your level of honesty in a way that I don't think I've appreciated that from commissioners before. there's compromise here, isn't there, that says actually the document very clearly says there's some compromise here between what the public want, what I suspect we all want as far as giving resource to the police, what the Chief Constable says he wants, and actually what you're able to deliver or feel the need to deliver. I just wonder whether you could talk us through, it's a relatively slim difference between £10 and £13, but what are those things that we won't be able to do rather than those things that we would be able to do if it was £13?
Thank you, Councillor Brown. It's a really good point. So we looked at, I did initially say, might want you to work on some numbers around a freeze, at which point Richard sort of looked at me as if to say, really? But we did actually work up the budget at 2.5%, then at the 3.98, and then looking at what the maximum would bring in. And it's around an extra, was it an extra £2 million a year. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. And of course, it's not just one off, you then have it in perpetuity. Of course, so you understand the compound value of that as well, being a councillor yourself. So yes, it has been a balance and it has been a tough call. With the cost of living having been, high for almost 2 years now, all right, it's just come down recently in the last quarter, but actually it has been very high for the majority of last year. And we do have some quite deprived and poor communities in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And whilst I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to denigrate the 83 pence a month, because on the face of it, but if you are struggling and you can't pay for everything you need to pay for now, it just makes your problem even worse. So we do need to consider that. I think the key thing for me between the £10 and the £13 and that £2 million, largely, if we had that extra money, it would be going into more police officers. It's then around how quickly you can recruit them, how quickly you can get them through driver training and everything else you need to do. And we are looking at driving quite, some efficiencies and quite sizable efficiencies, particularly potentially around our IT teams. Now, that will go quite a long way towards mitigating some of that £2 million. And so really it was my balance between, even if we went for the maximum, the pressure on the force to recruit all of those people, like 75 is a big challenge anyway in 1 year. So how would they be able to cope with that? And secondly to that, the fact that I do think we're going to have some money coming back that will cover almost half of that £2 million. So I think we can get a bit of money somewhere else to help us with some other bits, if that makes sense. But it has been a tough decision. Yeah, it's not easy.
Thank you very much. Right, this side, I'm just going to work around the room. Quick questions. Matt, next.
I wasn't expecting to be so quick. Thank you very much. This may well be a question for Richard, actually. You mentioned the split between local taxation and national taxation. You probably won't be surprised to hear me bring this up. Do you have a figure for the 2010 split? Because I think I do, and I make it around 68% is what we were getting from national government grant compared with where we are today. Is that the correct figure? And could you explain how that's occurred?
Yes, that is correct, and so that's where we were. So back in 2010-11, it was a 2/3, 1/3 split. So over the years, what's happened is the level of grant increase has been relatively small, generally around sort of 1 or 2%, and the council tax referendum limit has been given a much higher limit in previous years. And so coming into this process, we were told from the spending review it would be £10. At the last minute, it was increased to £13. The previous year, it was going to be £10. At the last minute, it was increased to £15. And so there's been some significant precept flexibility that's been awarded to PCCs since PCCs have been in office during that period, which has really pushed that burden towards PCCs making decisions to increase council tax to afford the level of investment. And you must remember that when the Minister and the Home Secretary set that referendum limit, they are setting that at a level which they are saying is not excessive. So they think it's completely reasonable for PCCs to put up the council tax by those amounts. But some of the rationale for that is because the grant which government are able to provide us with is not moving up each year by the levels which it would have done to keep pace with even inflation, let alone the other pressures which have been faced.
Thank you.
Just one point on that one, sorry if I can. That's why, as well, in that slide, the sources of funding slide that was put up there, you will see that last year, local council taxpayers were funding 42% of the overall income. This year, with my re-equalisation, it's 41%. I know it's only 1% less, but we're trying to get back to the point that Councillor Renard's making, which is reducing some of the dependency on local taxpayers back to the centre.
Okay. Very briefly, please, Matt. We've got other
Yeah,
people
so
to ask.
would you say that overall the burden has shifted from national progressive taxation to local taxes over that 10-year period, 13-year period?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, moving on up this side. Alan, next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, my question is, in terms of the precept allocation and where you're setting it in your budget, I didn't see any specific allocations for more operational efficiency issues, because going back to the 101 centre, if 77% of calls are going in are not actually shouldn't be police related, how do we have any investments targeted at reducing that internally by working with partner agencies? From my own experience in magistrates' courts, the amount of time I see police officers sat around in waiting rooms because of inefficiencies in the court in the prosecution service. In terms of actually improving our responsiveness to investigating crime, having those officers available. But what I didn't see in the precept discussion there was any, shall we say, project costs or investments to help the police work with partner agencies to improve the efficiency of use of police, not in their focus on addressing criminality.
So 2 things. Richard will cover the National Productivity Review in a minute. I'm going to give you a quick thing about our process. Scott may want to come in as well on some of the things he's done around net teams and things like that. No, sorry, Met teams. So the efficiency savings piece of work and how we can squeeze more out of what we've got starts right at the very beginning of this budget process. So that happens looking at sort of back in the sort of summertime before we get started on the budget proper and sort of like end of August, beginning of September, when like you do in your councils, we start sitting down and working through things. So I just alluded to one of those efficiency savings that is coming from, perhaps we haven't covered it in the detail today because we're just waiting on some of those numbers to be confirmed, but perhaps from some efficiencies that are rising through IT and some of the projects that we've got on the go there. And they are quite big numbers because IT is often very expensive. So there is absolutely ongoing efficiency work that happens within the force, but working both at Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary, what's going on within the Chiefs teams, but also working with Thames Valley, who obviously we have our joint operation unit with, and actually IT is covered between the 2 forces as it happens under one big IT department that we share with them. So there is absolutely ongoing stuff that we are doing. Now, in terms of the specific projects like the amount of time police officers are sat in any departments or in hospital or on scene guards or looking for missing children, for example, yes, there is a big push that's gone on nationally on that one, and something that I've taken the lead on for police and crime commissioners with our previous Home Secretary, and she then kicked off a load of reviews which have resulted, for example, in right care, right person, which some of you who sit on LGA boards would have become aware of, and this is really about the burden on policing around mental health crisis support. Police officers often being the first on scene. The worst place to take someone who's having a complete mental health breakdown, perhaps schizophrenic, is to take them into a concrete cell. But very often that is the only available option at that point, because a normal mainstream hospital is not the right place for them either. So to become sectioned or to go into a hospital if they don't agree voluntarily, they have to be taken to a police station for that assessment. The burden on the police is enormous, and I couldn't have stressed that enough to the Home Office and the previous Home Secretary. And so it did kick off a big national review. So it is an ongoing piece of work. We are working ever closer with the Local Government Association now. I attended a meeting all about right care, right person of the LGA National Executive 2 weeks ago. And between Michael Gove, the Secretary of State for DLUC, and James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, they are talking ongoing about where other savings and pressures can be made around children's services, adult social care, and mental health and public health teams. Richard will take us quickly through the National Productivity Review.
Thank you. So there is a National Productivity Review which is ongoing at the moment, which covers some of the things you mentioned there. So in particular, working with partners on a national basis to say, how can we be more efficient at making the best use of those police officer resources? We don't want them hanging around court all the time. Can we get courts to open for more hours as well to make the whole process of policing work more efficiently? In ourselves as well, locally, we've obviously had the area model review happening this year, which has given us an opportunity to look at efficiencies in the way that we deploy our people as part of that. And we've also introduced the CM 101 changes in this year, which is the victims portal, which is allowing victims and witnesses to contact officers directly through a system rather than having to go through the 101 call line, which has improved efficiency within the call centre significantly. Within the budget for next year, in Appendix C, there is a small budget for CM 101 extension, which will take that programme on beyond to the point of charge, so that witnesses would still be able to contact their officer in the case without the need to go through 101. So we continue to look at efficiency opportunities in those areas. As the Commissioner said, we've got an ongoing review with IT, which is going to be reporting shortly, February, and another ongoing joint review with Thames Valley Police as our partner, and reviewing our joint operations unit for efficiencies as well, with a plan for more efficiency revisions during the summer of next year as well.
Anything? Okay. Question, Jonathan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. My question was really about the engagement that you went through in contacting residents for the survey. A particularly low number responding to the survey. So what sort of levels of engagement have you done? What level of engagement will you do in the future, to explain to residents the areas that you're targeting in the precept increase, but in the future as well? I mean, just in the Winchester district alone, we've had far more people respond to a bin survey than the police and crime survey, and I know it's a really important issue for residents, especially on roads and speeding. So just if you could go into a bit more detail on what was done for engagement on that resident survey and what will be done in the future.
Thank you very much. It's a very good point. Last year we had over 8,000 people respond to my police precept survey, and that's because I think people had bigger concerns last year, and because they are less concerned about policing. I mean, we've got lots of people on our database that we email out to. The force put it onto their Facebook page, onto their social media platforms. We're sharing it continually through Facebook, Twitter, as I say, and also we use company to boost it out, to get it out to people. We have surveys in libraries for people who are not online, who particularly elderly people or people with some kind of vulnerability or disability where they can't, if you're blind, for example, and you're just not using things online that much. So we do try and reach out. We do raise the profile. We ask councils also to share it as well. So we do an awful lot of community outreach. But like I say, last year, over 8,000 people. But I think that's because people were using their voice. They were filling the survey in because they weren't happy. This year, people are much happier. I think there's still a way to go in terms of improving trust, confidence and getting those charge rates up and bringing crimes down. But I think that there has been an improvement over the last year, and that's why we've seen that drop, because we did everything this year that we did last year. In fact, actually probably did more this year because we've got more people on our email database this year, because I've done nearly 2,000 bits of casework as well. And largely we ask people if they're happy to be added onto our database, and they say yes. And it may be that because there's a concern over bins in Winchester, that's maybe why you're getting in that uptake, because quite often it is when someone has an apprehension or an issue about something, it motivates them to do it. And if they're largely happy or all right with the service, then their lives are busy, they carry on with other things. But I would love it to be 10 times that. I really, really would.
Okay, thank you very much. This side, questions? Luigi.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for a thorough report from the team. Richard, this is really for you. As you know, one of the questions I keep asking about is inflation rates and stuff like that, and that particularly worries me. So assuming we do not have any clawback, this year effectively we've got 1.6% increase. You've got an inflation rate of 2% going forward. I noticed the budget deficit, which I think in the future you partially are going to clear through the use of cunning reserves and potentially money from other sources. But if you look at the things you need to do, like IT, estates, and I don't know what the best comparators are, but for example, for actual police type stuff like defence or National Health Service, the inflation rate for a replacement of items or new bits of kit is significantly greater than 2%. So my question is, bear in mind this is a financial thing in there, and this preset, some of it will be used. It relates with reserves as well. Like, and I just look at it as a spectrum. How confident are you that we're going to not run out of money next year?
All of those assumptions we put through the external auditors as well when we set the budget as well, and so they look to check that they're on a reasonable basis. We compare them and benchmark them with other PCCs and other local authorities, and it's a view that most authorities are saying that actually we will budget at that level. It is a risk. I agree, it's a risk that they could be higher, and that's why we have the risk reserve set aside for that purpose. When we go through and we produce our forward budget, we have a person in finance who's responsible for each individual line of the budget. And so as part of what they do when they build the budget for the following year is for anything which is non-pay, so buying equipment, etc., we look at what the contract is that we have in place and what the inflation indices are within that contract as well. And so we build that in an individual line basis. So the overall kind of headline figure will be 2% will be our general approach, but where we know that there are areas where those inflations pressures are higher, then we're building those into the forward budget as well. And so that also reduces some of our risk where we know that we have those higher inflations to build in. But most of our budget is on pay, as we said earlier, and so actually it's the police pay award, which is the critical point. And we've had that conversation with the Minister where there is actually expected to be some support should that pay award be higher than 2.5%. And so anything on the non-pay side, we're already in existing contracts for a lot of that pay, and we can see what the contract provision is for future pay awards.
Thank you.
Sorry. I noticed quite rightly that you identified the pay bulge there. Now, I'm a school governor, and over the last umpteen years, I've seen how the government has dealt with, teacher pay. In most cases, it has not been fully funded, and that's caused huge pressures. Do you expect a similar situation to develop going forward?
So I'm part of the National Finance Coordination Committee. That's something which we are feeding back. So we've been given good access to the Minister and his team throughout the budget setting process this year. So we've had really good insight as to what we might expect and why we have the amounts that we do. We hope to have engagement with the Minister going forwards over the course of this year. I know it's going to be a busy year for ministers, but we still expect to be able to have that opportunity to make the case, particularly around those medium-term pressures on police increments, which is affecting all forces, and sustainability that I raised, which will affect all forces as well. And so we are consistent across all PCCs. These are pressures. We hope that government's listening, but as I said, we need to be aware that actually if the government can't find the money, then there may be challenges for us to meet on those areas, and they could cause pressures. You've heard as well through questions earlier that some of the responses sometimes from government is to increase the precept flexibility to deal with those sorts of things rather than government themselves having to find that money. So that could also be a possibility and a result of those conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Tonya.
Yeah, can I firstly thank Donna and her team for staying and explaining the budget and not realising there's only 13 of us and disappearing. In percentage terms, you said there were 8,000 responses. Do you know what that is in percentage terms? That's my question. There's other things for debate. But Chair, just so you're aware, you went around so quickly that Shirley and Martin didn't have time to put their hands up to let you know that they had questions to ask. You may want to
That's
go
all
back
right.
outside in a
I'll chair
minute.
the meeting, Tonya, and I have spotted them.
I'm very well aware, but you went around so quickly and two of them put their hand up and you had moved past, so we're just making sure that you were aware.
Thank you very much. So the 8,000, you wanted the percentage split. Richard's just going to find them. I think it was actually unbelievably. Oh, sorry. Do you mean in terms of the actual like £5, £10, or do you mean the like demographics?
No, it's 8,000 responses you've had, but how many?
Sorry. Oh right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know that there's about we will have to come back to you because we get the number of homes based on the council tax that councils collect and then give us our policing bit back. So obviously, as you know, the local authorities collect the policing element and then give it to us. So they give us the number of homes each year. Have you got that roughly?
Well, in terms of In terms of the responses, obviously responses can be individuals. So actually, if there's 4 people in a home, they could make 4 separate responses and have completely different views. So the population of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight is circa 2 million population. So the 8,000 was the number of responses in last year that Donna was talking about. So it's just over 6,000 in this year. So that's around about 0.3% of the entire population have taken the time to send back some comments on it.
Yeah. I know, but you know what? I think if the chief was saying, right, I'm going to have to cut all PCSOs, or we are going to be, closing all of our police stations and just having an online model only, or then I can imagine I would have had thousands of responses. And that's, I guess, the point I was making from Jonathan's question earlier, that actually, when people are unhappy, they vote with their feet, right? They tell you when they're not very happy or when they're anxious, they've got concerns. And look, I wish it was a lot more than it was. And the way for me to drive up that response, and perhaps, I'd really be interested to get your take on this, would be to put some money behind it. Like we do put a bit of money behind it to boost it, but to actually spend some significant amounts of money, it could be like 50, 60 grand to really push it out. And I probably would get, into the tens of thousands of responses, 40, 50,000, but we would have to do that for months and it would cost money. But, there's no, that is something that I could consider if the panel think that's really important. And I really welcome perhaps doing a piece of work offline on that with you, because I do want every person in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to understand what they're getting from their police force, how many cops they've got, how much it costs them, what kind of service they get, and to tell me if they're not happy, because I can't do my job if they don't. So this is obviously on top of me going out and doing public meetings all the time. Every month I'm out all the time, evenings, as you know, but it's a good point.
I think it's probably a lot of people are, what's the point? Because they're not getting the response. But as Scott said, if we start getting the response from the police force that they want, it might then drive them up, because it's the same with the 101. What's the point of phoning them? They've had that bad experience. That will come with time. It's okay saying times are better, but it's until people start having a better experience, I don't think you're going to get those coming back to you.
Trevor.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
That's all.
Right, sorry. Yeah. Right, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thank you for an excellent presentation today, very helpful. My question really is on police recruitment. At the last meeting I attended 2 years ago, 650 was an aspiration. You've achieved that, so that's excellent news, of course. You're now talking about an additional 75, and there's a grant for that, but it's dependent on meeting those targets. I always worry, to be honest, in a recruitment process, you reach saturation point at times. So how confident are you to achieve that particular target?
Thank you very much, and a very pertinent question. Yes, it's a challenge. It is a challenge, and my recruitment team are doing everything they possibly can to recruit to achieve the numbers, and they have done. And obviously the finances on the national uplift were dependent upon achieving that target. With the additional officers that we require in Hampshire, that's a further stretch on them. What we do though is absolutely maintain standards. And make sure that we're recruiting quality officers. It goes hand in glove with the retention strategy. We have to recruit less if we keep more that are already in the service. So that has been a real focus for us, and my HR director is currently developing even more options around how we can keep people in the service. I'm confident we can achieve the target, but it will require an awful lot of effort. But we're well versed now. This is year 3 that we've been recruiting, so we sort of know what works and what doesn't work. So we've learned from recent times as to how to achieve that.
Thank you very much. And I had spotted your hand earlier, Shirley, so if you want to.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, again, congratulations. I think, Richard, your presentation on the first meeting before Christmas was the best I've ever seen. And again, today you've been consistent. So thank you for that. 2 quick questions, really. And I think just following on from Tonya, the fact we've only got 0.03% that responded, part of the consultation. My question was going to be, do we know the geographics and the demographic breakdown of that? Because 31% of that is only 0.01%. who said they didn't want an increase, and yet that 0.01% is quite a driver here, and that's a bit of a worry for me. And secondly, and this is a really quick question, and Richard, I'm sure you'll answer me in one sentence. We haven't heard anything about any income we get from investments. We've got sizable estates and reserves, and we must have had a good benefit from that last year when our inflation was up nearly 10%. I appreciate it's dropping now, but I'd just be interested in the income line from investments, if I may. Thank you, Chair.
We're going to do a little bit of a tag team here, just very quickly between Richard and I. The investment stuff, first of all, is a good news story. So we budget £2 million a year for the income that we get off the back of our reserves that we've got waiting to spend on the airwave radio upgrade, taser upgrade, the spending money on the states, and you've seen that there's £50 odd million earmarked for that. So we need to be able to get to it relatively quickly, but last year we were able to put it away for a bit longer because we knew that we were working towards the new police station and front counter programme. So the £2 million in the budget that we have to come off the back of investment income, we've actually brought in £5.8 million over the last year because of two things. One, the upturn in interest rates, as you've quite rightly said, Shirley, and secondly, because actually we've been slightly bolder in doing some things that have helped, which Richard and I, again, that's always a conversation between, the principal office holder, the strategy office holder and the Section 151 officer in terms of your treasury management policy and making sure that it is not too ambitious to take too much risk of public money, but not too cautious that you're actually doing a disservice with the opportunity you have. So I'm really grateful to Richard, the team, and the treasury management team actually at Hampshire County Council that help manage that for us on a day-by-day basis. Secondly, in terms of the survey, we have in the report, I'm just going to try and find it for you, there is a breakdown around I think it was something like 30% of females responded to the survey. The majority, 69% were actually men. And then the age profile is in there, and so is the where. So as well as saying, that burglary, ASB, speeding, they were like the top three areas. It also gives you their age demographic of those over 65, 45. So Richard's got it. I'm going to pause here and hand back to him.
Sorry, I missed that.
It's right at the end of the report. So it's page 78 of our report, which in your pack I think is page 94. There's a chart in there which shows where the respondents came from. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Martin.
Possibly. Hello. Thank you, Chair. Oh, it's still red. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the comments and the information that we received this morning. I have to touch on that 31% number again, because I think it's a complete misrepresentation of the support or otherwise for this precept. And I think it's given an emphasis in the report that it doesn't merit, frankly. And I would expect to see the voting in any numbers of that nature that you would say this was taken from 0.03% or whatever it was of the population, and therefore you can take notice of it or you cannot. An additional point, I will look up and check on the demographics again, because obviously I'm more interested in one area of the Hampshire than others. But I would ask, do you share my, let's talk here, I'm going to know aggravation, anger, with the fact that even if we were predisposed to do so, we cannot vote down your precept recommendation because this panel hasn't bothered to turn up.
Am I angry about that? Is that your question?
I'll change it for you. What are your feelings toward that?
I would never be angry with a panel. So, look, I mean, it's democracy, and people elect their representatives to be their voice on whatever that matter may be, running their council, parish council, or being a rep on the police and crime panel. Yeah, I mean, it's a matter for individuals, isn't it? But look, whether or not you can legally vote this down today, if you have serious concerns about my budget, then I have serious concerns as well. And I need to go away with the two gentlemen either side of me and have conversations about how we can address, because you represent you represent millions, actually over 1 million people between you, and I need to take on board your views, and I take it very seriously. So to me, it's kind of a slight misnomer in whether or not you can vote it down or not today. If you have concerns, I will be going away and looking at that.
If I can help move things forward, I think we have legislation which says that if 14 members were to veto the precept, then the Police and Crime Commission would have to go away, take account of our comments, redesign it, and by the 15th of February, I think, come up with a new one. That's how it is. Let's see where we go with the debate. I'm going to move forward now, and we're going to have that debate, and we're going to see what people think. Sorry, I am going to move forward with the debate. If other questions come out during that debate, I'm sure they will be answered. But I'm just conscious.
So we've been here for 2 hours, Mr. Chair. Can I suggest we have a 5-minute comfort break?
Okay, thank you for that comment. Is there a general view? People would like a little break? Okay, happy to do that. When we come back, we will move straight into the debate and then obviously deal with the rest of the business. So it's now 12:05. Can I suggest at 12:15 everybody is back in their seats, raring to go? Thank you. please. That's done. Okay, we are now back online again, and we're going to move straight into the debate on the Police and Crime Commissioner's proposed precept. You got a problem? That's what I'm about to do, yeah. Okay, so what I want to do first is just to draw your attention to what it is we're debating, which is specifically the recommendations. And those are the recommendations which are on page 17 of your agenda papers, numbered 1.1 through to 1.6. And there will also be one additional recommendation, and that is giving delegated authority to the Democratic Services Officer supporting the panel in consultation with the Chairman to formally report the views of the panel on the precept to the Commissioner in writing. So it is as written there. So what we're now doing is debating those recommendations. So I'll just ask first, does anybody want to propose any other recommendation other than those which are before us? Okay, then that is what we are now debating, and the first contribution will be Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I really wanted to say to the Chief Constable and the Commissioner that I joined the panel in 2016. So it seems I still feel like a new boy, but I sit here and I've never had so much trust and confidence in the Chief Constable and the Commissioner as I have in the last 8 years, because fundamentally I sit here with all the conversations that we've had about money and increases and actually the difference that has made, and you're able to articulate and demonstrate the difference that it is making operationally and to the service that our residents feel. So I think it's really important that we say that, or I say that as my personal view. And I fundamentally look at the information and what you're able to tell us about value for money and say, do you know what, sometimes that's really difficult for everybody to express, and you've expressed that really well. I absolutely sit here with a level of frustration in the last 8 years, which I think you're very good at not mentioning, which is the gap in funding. In 2016, when I joined, I was astounded by the gap of the Fair Funding Review having a gap of 43 million, and actually understand that that's still a very similar amount and the impact that would make to the number of officers, Donna, which is why I asked the question, well, what is it you aren't able to do if it was £13 rather than £10? So I think it's really important that we recognise that. The messages do need to get to everybody, as far as Scott, your message, which I love, is relentlessly pursuing criminals, and actually everybody understanding that, feeling that, and doing their bit, because citizens, we can do that element as well. I also really, as somebody who joined the panel in 2016, think it's really important that, and sitting in the chair's position, it's very important that we understand our powers and the power of veto. It's also relatively toothless, because Donna can go away in the next couple of days, change it by a penny and do what she wants. And actually, very graciously, Donna, you've sat there and turned around and says, our spirit of our support is more important than any ability that we may have to vote for it. And I think that's really important, that we can all have the constructive relationship that we need to have, because fundamentally our primary role is one of support and challenge. So we can have that going forwards. And I think it's also really important, isn't it, as far as having that consensus as a panel, because we all have a massive contribution to make, because we see what the police do for us and what the Commissioner's Office does for us from very different street corners. What goes on in Basingstoke is very different from what goes on in Gosport, what goes on in Southampton or Portsmouth, or perhaps very similar in some respects. So we can understand the difference that it makes, what our street corners help us to do. But there's something for me that says, absolutely, I can sit here being really frustrated that I wish the grant proportion was more. And my politics tell me that I wish the local taxation was less. And we could sit here and support a freeze in local council tax precepts, but we can't do that. And I absolutely support more resources going to policing and the Commissioner's Office to do what our residents want you guys to do. So absolutely, I just want to put that very directly out there, that I'm going to support it. Veto's a red herring for this committee because it's toothless, and the conversation and the debate and understanding how we feel about those things and on behalf of our residents is much more powerful. And I really appreciate that that is how it is responded to from the people who sit at the front table. But absolutely my support, and I get how difficult that decision has been.
Thank you very much. Any more? It's going to be a quick debate. Matt.
Thank you, Chair. I actually think that the change in the burden of taxation is actually quite an important point. I think Hampshire is the third least funded constabulary in the country through a funding formula that is no longer fit for purpose. And I think actually this panel has a duty to send a clear message to the Home Office that we as a police and crime panel no longer feel that that is an acceptable place for Hampshire to be. That actually we do require that fair funding, and that 68% shift from where we were in 2010 to where we are now, plus the 50 million shortfall from that period to now, is actually unacceptable. And I think that reflects very well on what we're seeing in terms of local government overall, and the challenges that we all face actually around this table as patrons, as servants to local government. And I actually think that, yes, I believe that the Chief Constable, thank you, and the PCC are making right steps in trying to address that significant shortfall, and I appreciate that, and I think that's great. But at the same time, this 50 million gap that we have seen since 2010 is something that is a disservice to our local residents. And I do see it in many of the PAC meetings where we have members of the community come up and say exactly how disenfranchised they currently feel with policing. And it is a reflection of what's also happening in local government in terms of that dissatisfaction and our difficulty in trying to deliver that. So on that basis alone, and for that very clear reason, I think I would like to send a clear message to the Home Office. And part of that, as a yes, maybe political stunt, will be to not endorse the increase in the local precept at this time, with a very clear message that we expect to see more coming from central government. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. With your indulgence, just a quick comment on the consultation, representing the area that has the title of the lowest response rate in the county. I'm going to look at the figures actually. That note that Rushmore has a population which is younger than the average, and also 10% of the population is Nepali. Perhaps it's not surprising that we do get quite such a low response in there. However, I would like to congratulate Donna on one figure that stands out in there, and that's the 77% who were aware of Donna and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. She's done much over these past years to lift the profile of the office that she serves in, and it's only to her credit to having done that. I just want to turn to the £10 stroke £13 question. And we know the system that we work on. If we don't go for the maximum here, that gets carried forward, as Donna said, and compounded through to future years. So it's no money that we can't get back in future. And I look at the forecast there of an increasing deficit, and also the risks of inflation. You know, we saw what happened with the outbreak of the conflict in the Ukraine, and we note the dangers far from our shores in the Middle East at the moment, and the potential that may have on inflation. So there may be perhaps a pause for thought there. I mean, I certainly don't believe in taxation for the taxation itself, but of course we could be tying our hands for future budgets by not going for the full £13. Having said that, then noting the table that Mr. Crouch put up earlier of the national figure.
clear on where we as a Hampshire authority stand, then perhaps I should say that I'm thankful that the River Blackwater takes its current course rather than perhaps quarter of a mile further north when I look at the Surrey figure. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. David?
I don't believe in cutting our noses off to spite our faces, and I would never suggest that in order to make a point to central government we should consider voting against this particular requirement. My only question, perhaps suggestion, is that had two options been provided for a £13 or a £10, I would have been inclined to support the Chief Constable's recommendation. So perhaps in future we might have the flexibility to suggest or consider options which may be available. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Legally, the Police and Crime Commission needs to present a budget, not two budgets, so we can only consider the budget that is before us, but thank you for your comments. Luigi, and then Tonya. Oh, we'll get there.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for putting together this this paper. So forgetting the issue of direct and or local taxation, which my own view for it is and has always been since I came to the panel that despite the Commissioner's best efforts, the Home Office funding formula has really never been sorted out. Okay, and that's just going to increase pressure because we've got coastline, we've got ports, seaports and airports and all that stuff, and that creates a lot of additional policing sort of requirements. And I think there's a real failure of political leadership, not so much from Donna, but from the MPs in this area, which basically needed to get the skates on and they haven't. I'm grateful for the clarity of the Chief Constable and the Commissioner putting forward these budget proposals. As a former senior manager in soccer, and having spent time within the military justice system, I'm glad to see that some four key points have been addressed. One is the importance of intelligence, because at the end of the day, intelligence is quite key in doing any investigative work, especially for what I call bulk of serial crimes. Secondly is introducing additional line supervision. And I think that's quite important because effectively we have a very inexperienced police force. And comparing the police to the army, for example, where we've got lots of NCO ranks, there is, I think, has always been a problem structurally within the British police because you've got police constable, sergeant, and then, inspector. The other thing, I think, is the offender management. Now, that's actually quite critical, okay? And sometimes we forget. It's an excellent spend to save measure from my perspective, having been involved in it, working with charities with serious sex offenders. And good police input into that makes quite a significant difference. And finally, this question of vetting. I was quite surprised when I spent time in soccer, the level of vetting of police officers running very, very complicated and sensitive investigations, who were not vetted. Whilst in the military, from the intelligence community and others, we'd have expected that to happen. Okay, and I also welcome, increased emphasis on professional standards. And that's important, not just for maintaining, the quality of the police officers, but also clearing police officers who have unjustly been accused of all sorts of strange sort of things. My experience in soccer, for example, was that organised criminals would quite often accuse key investigating officers to get them off the backs for months or years if they weren't cleared by professional standards. So I'm actually minded, very much like one of my colleagues, is to support a £13 rise, okay, sort of over it. And I know there's a cost of living issue, but we did discuss this. There's lots of exemptions for people who are on benefits and other things in there. And, we were discussing this, last meeting, is in my town, Andover, which is, 50,000 people, we have had a declining tax base over the last year, which is quite significant. And the people who are most affected by crime tend to be the poorer people. We tend to think it's the rich who complain the loudest and stuff like that, but actually it's the poor. And crime also costs our economy significant amount of money. And the Chief Constable quite rightly said, shoplifting, which in many cases is just being completely ignored, both by the shops and by law enforcement. So I'm quite minded to support the 13 quid, and I wish we had that option. However, I do think that we have to have a discussion going forward about value for money and outputs, and I know the Commissioner would be very much in favour of that. And how good our policing how good should our policing be? What expectations do we expect from it? Because it's a bit like defence or health. We could be spending an infinite amount of money, and notice Richard is nodding, but to get the best possible results possible. But actually, what should the optimum be in terms of as you've tried to do in this budget, in managing the needs and what the resources are? Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Luigi. Tonya next, and then Martin.
Donna, this isn't going to surprise you. I can't support the increase. I still don't think we're getting value for money. And I'll just give you a few examples of why. I came to this meeting today ready to say that I'd lost faith in the police force and that I can't champion it anymore. Some of the figures I've had today, I'm going to say I'm losing faith in the police and I'm finding it difficult to support and champion them. And it goes back to what you're telling me that you're doing. I'm calling you as a team, so this is nobody, and what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing myself. For example, you're talking about working with youths to keep them on the right path. One example, we run Friday night football in Eastleigh. We have some real issues with the ASB at one of the particular venues. Police response has been pretty poor, to the extent that they've not really helped us. We've now got security. We're paying security to keep the ASB away, to keep those few youths on the straight and narrow, which they need. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot worse. We've had issues of youths on parish buildings, dangerous, plus the fact that they're vandalising. A crime number gets given. Go and see your insurance. We've had calls from burglaries where equipment's been left from those, doing the crimes. They call the police and say, I've got a crowbar, I've got this, that and the other. Do you want to come out? Do you want to fingerprint it? Do you want to do it? We might get to you. Doesn't happen. So people are getting to the stage where they're not calling 101. People are losing faith. And I just find it really hard because I've twice use the police, and one of them was recently, and I will be putting a complaint in after this meeting. 101 response, fantastic. It actually took me, it was like I'd rung the number, went like that, and it got picked up, and it was almost, I was lost because I was expecting that wait. That was brilliant. She took the details, it was fantastic. It was what happened afterwards, it was a disaster. And I just want you to indulge me for 2 seconds. Is it a crime, is it criminal damage to hit somebody's vehicle and cause damage? The answer to that's yes. Is it a crime to fail to report an accident? The answer is yes. Is it a crime to leave the scene of an accident? The answer is yes. You talk about CCTV. There was CCTV of the incident, and I couldn't get anything other than insufficient evidence, and nobody went out to view CCTV. And it's one of the things that I sit here, and this is why I'm saying I'm losing faith. You're telling us you want us to put CCTV in as councils to help with crimes and things. What's the point if it's not followed up? So that's why I'm saying these are the things that I'm hearing. This is experience as well, that we're not getting what you're telling us we're getting. So in a capacity of we sit here trying to get value for money, and don't get me wrong, Matt Paling, what a breath of fresh air he is. He's doing a lot of work in Eastleigh. There is a lot of good going on, but it's these things, the low-level crime, it's kind of it's low-level crime. It's almost like it doesn't matter. Shoplifting was a low-level crime. Today you're telling us it was 25% up. This low level is going to increase because the criminals that are doing it know nobody's there to actually do anything about it. So those are all going to start increasing as well. So I don't think we're getting value for money. I would like to know at some stage, the low-level crime, what isn't being investigated. And don't get me wrong, you know, rapes, sexual assaults, I'm not saying that they aren't worth investigating. I'm not saying they're not horrific, but I can't believe that all of the police force take on just those issues. There must be something there to deal with that low-level crime before it increases and it then becomes prolific. So those are just my points on that.
Thank you. Martin, you had your hand.
In terms, here we go. In another couple of years, I'll get it. In terms of support for the police, I was an army officer along with Luigi, actually, for 20, goodness knows how many years. So I'm very pro law enforcement. I've always gone out of my way to support the police as far as I can, and I will continue to do so. And I don't see the precept approval or not approval as a comment on the police and the approach. Nor do I. The veto is something or nothing. If we can't veto anything, well, there's no point in having it. That's just my view. Now the problem then is, other than harassing and haranguing you, Donna, which I hate to do, but how else do we express to the government that we are so unhappy with their contribution and have been for 10, 12, 13, 14 years, whatever it is? How do we get that message across? Because as I understand it, the proposal is there, ready to be released in terms of contribution, and they just won't release it. Now, if that's wrong, then obviously I'll withdraw that. But that's where I think we are. So how do we, Hampshire, let the government know that we're not happy with it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm looking for other hands. Not desperately, but I am. I've got Trevor down there and I've got Jonathan here. I'll start with Jonathan and then move to Trevor.
Wonderful, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a comment that Don made earlier. If you're not happy, I'm not happy, and you'll take that back as feedback. I mean, the budget is going through. We know that. It's impossible for us to veto the budget. So I think we have an opportunity to express that view, for Donna to take that as feedback, that we do want you to lobby the national government for further funding, rather than relying on the local taxation base. I think that's really important. I know we do that from a local government side as well, in the lack of national funding towards local governments. So I think that feedback is very important. Looking at the specifics of the budget, that there are some fantastic things that you're saying in there, but there is a real lack of confidence from rural areas that I represent, say Bishop's Waltham, whereby most people are telling me, well, I only call 101 to get a crime number so I can tell my insurance company, rather than any crime there, small thefts from sheds, etc., being investigated. So that's a real disappointment. So I'm going to take the opportunity to vote against the proposal tonight, or today, sorry, used to evening meetings, because I think that message needs to go back and needs to go to the national government, that there needs to be a higher proportion of funding from the national government rather than local residents here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Trevor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've been listening very carefully to comments being made at the present moment, but I guess the whole point really is we are where we are at the present moment. I think we would all agree on the government funding situation, and we're not happy with it, but we've got to make a decision one way or the other today. My view is that I'm very happy with the proposal, and I think the other points, listening around the table, is that some of the comments made about the police, for instance, I think we shouldn't forget the improvements that have come from via the police and the police crime commissioner over this last couple of years, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And I think in any big organisation, we could actually pick the bits and pieces locally or whatever else that are not happy. I suppose for me, being completely independent now, is I don't have a view on that with residents, because I don't have any, other than the residents I support, through the whole of Hampshire in that respect. So, the long story short, I'm happy to agree with the proposals. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll make some comments, if I may, while others think whether they have anything further they wish to add. I'm going to support the budget. I think in terms of funding, it is what it is. The government support, such as it is there. And speaking as a leader of a council that has seen government grant several years ago go to zero, then I've got some sympathy, but less sympathy when there's significant government grant and increasing coming through, compared with getting nothing, which is how it is for a number of district councils. That in Fareham, council tax accounts for, I think it's 16% of our spending, but government grant doesn't account for any of it. And we have to raise the rest of the money through fees and charges and unpopular things like parking and that sort of thing. In terms of the consultation that was carried out, having bearing scars of lots of consultations over the years, and generally I think it is a good result, because if you're doing something dreadful and people get angry about that, consultation responses go off the scale, and you get thousands upon thousands of them if people don't like something. So I always take poor turnouts to consultations as not a bad thing. I've seen the effort that has gone into generating response, and I think that's been very well done and has been done very positively. And I can compare and contrast with other police and crime commissioners, both locally and nationally, and see that I think what has been done here to try and engender public engagement is good. And if people do not wish to respond, that's entirely a matter for them. But I don't think we can live in a world where we say, well, everyone that didn't support is therefore not in support. We can't do it that way. We have to take the figures that are before us, and there's always the visceral reaction of, I don't want an increase, I don't want to pay any more money to anyone for anything ever. And some people start at that point, and then you have other people on a different end of the political spectrum who love to spend other people's money, and they want to see taxes go up as high as possible, because in some respects they don't actually pay them. So I think what is before us is a good balance. I fully take the Chief Constable's view, and he'd be wrong to hold any other view. He wants the maximum pounds possible to go in to delivering an excellent police force. And that's natural, and I fully accept that. We're, of course, representing, as most of us do, the residents who have to pay for that one way or another. And then, of course, we might take a different view, and I'd probably be nearer the freeze end than I would the maximum end. But I think what the PCC has put before us today is a good compromise. And I think it takes account of the people that don't want to see an increase. It takes account of the people that would pay the maximum. I've been in the situation that Tonya is discussing or has mentioned about losing faith in the constabulary. And it's a sad situation when you get to that. I've been and felt that myself. But since, I'm not just saying this because he sat there, but since our new Chief Constable came in with a view that what the force should be about is catching criminals, I've certainly seen the effects of that across the borough and county in terms of positivity, both in how the police are regarded, because policing only happens by consent in this country. So in terms of how the police are regarded, and in terms of the attitude to crime, from our own district commander in Fareham to the Chief Constable sat over there and the Police and Crime Commissioner. So I see great positive, and this is the budget that they have come up with between them. And although as a council leader, I can only raise an extra £5 something, because we have such a low council tax in Fareham, and the Police and Crime Commissioner is looking to raise double what I'm able to. I certainly think it is the right thing to deliver what is being delivered. We are seeing the results. They are positive. They're not all as good as everybody would wish, but I think it's a good job being done in the most difficult of circumstances. This is the budget before us, and I'm actually very, very happy to support it. And I was only going to mention one thing that was within the budget, and that was just the talking about cars and electric cars. Don't run down that rabbit hole too quickly. because I was even reading comments from the chap who runs Toyota, who make more cars than anybody, saying that the number of electric cars is probably going to plateau at about a third. So don't go scarpering off buying stuff that there's not enough lithium in the ground to build, and there's not enough electricity in the grid to charge. So that's just my one point on the budget that you have put forward. So I will be supporting it. Any more comments to make? Shirley next.
Thank you, Chair. I came here today sitting on the fence, which is unusual for me. I don't usually sit on the fence because I do think there is a long-term conversation to be had about what we all understand by value for money and value for money policing. Maybe that's one for the future. However, I'm going to support the budget today, and I'm doing so mainly for one reason, and that is I saw a lot of stagnation in years 1 and 2 of the Police Commissioner's time during her role. I think in the last year, since we've had Chief Constable Chilton, it's been rather like watching a rocket take off. And for that reason, I would really like to give him every penny he needs to make sure he can soar. And we do hope you will soar, but we will be watching you. And I hope you go with the blessing that you get everything that's deserved for you, because I think you've made a terrific start and a massive impact already. So well done on that, and I'll be supporting the budget.
Thank you very much, Shirley. Leslie and then Alan. Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. I will be supporting the budget. From a borough point of view, where we are, and Shirley, I couldn't articulate it any better than what you've done. You've just turned it round. You are a police force now to the criminals. And previously as a police officer, I remember we were going through financial constraints, and it was determined that the question was, would you rather, to society, would you rather deal with the very serious offences or the shed breaks? So you kind of we were given a choice. And I'm really pleased now that we recognise that actually, although it's obviously really important to investigate the serious crimes, but it's also really important to recognise that a shed break or continual antisocial behaviour is the blight of a society and can impact somebody's quality of life. So I'm really pleased that you're doing everything for everyone. But it is only a year since Scott's been in, and already you're doing great things. So total support, 100%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to echo those thoughts in terms of the progress I've seen just in the last year and the activity in improving the visibility and the effectiveness of the police. And so you do need every penny you need in that. But I also think it's fair to say that we need to be able to get to a fair funding formula. And so I'd quite like Donna to make a commitment in the next meeting with Yvette Cooper that she tries to get this as a manifesto commitment, shall we say, to introduce that, because I don't believe this is on the current administration's radar to actually start this process in an election year. But I think we are able to give a message by not supporting this precept, but that does not mean that we don't support the police in their activities and in the plan that we've all reviewed and accepted in earlier meetings.
Okay, thank you, Alan. I guess just a note of caution. I don't really think a government minister of this government or any potential future government will look beyond, oh, Police and Crime Panel didn't support the precept. Oh, but not enough of them bothered to turn up to actually veto it. Oh, and that will be where it lies. Right? But I would certainly support the thought of perhaps a joint letter from the panel and the Police and Crime Commissioner to both shadow and government Home Secretaries saying what we feel. And I would certainly happily add that as an addendum to this recommendation, that we actually do that, because I think it's important that these points are made. But I wouldn't like members to think that just voting against a precept gives that message. What that gives is a message of lack of confidence in the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable. That is how I would read it in the press. Police and Crime Panel vote against PCC's precept. That won't help us. I'm not saying a letter will, but I would rather go down the route of dealing with the budget and dealing with our feelings on funding and the fairness of funding. I really think they're separate matters in this respect, and I don't think it would be helpful to damage the relationship. Whatever we may agree in this room is the rationale. I think it's important that we take it as a separate issue and say what we think about the funding formula. But I feel that most people in the room, I think, probably support the budget and what is actually being done with it. But I leave that to you to exercise your vote. Anybody else have any comments to make before I move to that vote? Simon.
Just one other thing, which is about the consultation, isn't it? And I know we all have these dilemmas in our local authorities about getting participation up. And I think there is something about getting that balance right, about how much money does the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner spend. And I reflect on, I think the last time the largest amount of money was spent on the consultation on the precepts, when quite a lot of panel members were invited to go along to grouped conversations, etc., etc. And I don't think we need to do that very often, but I think they're very powerful when we do it. And it's one of the things that I heard loud and clear when you also come from a different part of local government is, and it reinforces the right care, right person and other initiatives, because the biggest thing that I heard, and I think often lots of different organisations are guilty of this, that we see a void or a gap somewhere else and we feel it's our responsibility to fill it. And that's what I heard from the last time a significant amount of consultation was done with the public on the Police and Crime Commissioner's budget was, we support the increases, but not if you're then backfilling other places so we don't know where our tax is going. And I think there's something about that for me that says those, you know, how many calls aren't police matters go into the contact centre, how much time do police officers spend doing something which isn't their core job is something for me that says that helps answer that question. That the last time I heard a consultation that was significant, which says I'm quite happy to pay for the police through the police budget and the police precepts. And I think this is something, again, for us to keep our eye on with that, because we're creeping into all sorts of things, and people are genuinely shocked when police officers do spend so much time at A&E departments doing something which isn't their core job. So there is something for me that says consultation, I think it's very important. In Basingstoke, I'm sure they've got complete fatigue because everybody's asking them everything all of the time, but it's worth doing a deep dive every now and again.
Thank you, Simon. Matt.
This may well be just a question around the consultation as a whole. I think we kind of touched on some demographic detail and some bits and pieces around that. I'm not sure that it illustrates what banned properties those correspondents come from, in terms of, is that 31% some of the poorer parts of our communities? Because it is a 31%. It may well be that the response was low, but there are still 31% of people that were saying that potentially they don't feel they'd like to be able to spend more money on policing. That may be for a majority of reasons. It may well be that it's because they don't yet feel that they're getting value for money, much like Tonya has expressed, which I think is probably the case for some of my residents in Southampton. It may well be that the cost of living really is beginning to bite. And I think that is actually above those levels of those people that can apply for help, actually, that are beginning to struggle in that place. So I'd just be interested, Richard, if maybe you could get back to us with, if that's possible, any detail around the demographics of those individuals that are most affected, that have come back with the 31% of that 31%.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, anyone who has not spoken that would like to speak? I think most people have had their go. Is this a new point, Dimitri?
Yeah, sorry, I noticed other people have had the second chance. I mean, I think I've done a general survey around, the last couple of days of whether people would pay more to the precept, right? And basically everybody would be prepared to pay for it. But the key issue for them is the police then need to deliver. And I think we just need to keep that at the back of our mind. So a lot of people are impressed by where the Chief Constable was taking the constabulary. But then what we need to do is carry on that and also show that we're delivering with additional monies. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the recommendation is before us on paper. I added one which was about the feedback being done between the Democratic Support Officer and me, writing back to the Police and Crime Commissioner, but she hears it anyway, but we need to document that. And I would add a final one, which I hope would help with the very legitimate concerns around the fairness of the funding formula as it involves grant from central government to the Police and Crime Commissioner to deliver on the policing plan and the police force in Hampshire and Isle of Wight, which would be that the perhaps jointly we can sort it out afterwards, but Police and Crime Commissioner and this panel write to the appropriate minister, which I think will be the Home Secretary, and their shadow, pointing out our very significant concerns about that funding formula. So that's what I would add as an addition to the recommendation. So that is how it stands. So it is those points 1 to 6 plus a 7th plus an 8th. So I'm now going to look for a vote for those who are in favour of that set of recommendations, which includes, of course, supporting the precept. So can I see those in favour, please? And I will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And can I see those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is carried. Thank you. So that's the end of that item. And we now move on the agenda to item 9, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner Police and Crime Plan Performance and Delivery. Excuse me. This has been circulated, so I'm going to invite Donna and her officers to present this update in a response, of course, to the letter that I wrote to Donna on what it is we want to hear about, and then see if members have any questions. So, Donna, over to you.
Chair, sorry,
Scott.
if you're happy to excuse me at this point, I don't think I'm needed any longer. I've got another appointment, but I'd just like to thank the panel for their time and consideration and debate today and support in the force. So thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Scott, for your attendance. Right, Donna.
Thank you very much indeed. And also I'd like to reiterate my thanks to the panel for their support, and I very much take on board the points that you've made around the fairness of the unfair funding formula. So yes, thank you very much indeed. So time is getting on. Pete Jones is here from my office, and I'm going to hand straight over to him to take you through the update on the Police and Crime Plan update. And also, Pete, I understand you're taking the next item on the agenda, item 11, 10 and 11 together as well, with your understanding, Chair, is that correct? Yes, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair, panel. For our new member here, Pete Jones from the OPCC, and in broad summary, I help with some of my colleagues here support the Commissioner in the tracking, monitoring and delivery of a police and crime plan. So some familiar updates to the panel here in relation to what we're presenting today, which is around zero tolerance on knife crime. Just noting that the entry was July 22 in terms of the format of the updates that the panel receives now. And I think the Commissioner would support that line there about sort of long-term results and interventions. And I note as well that coming before the panel in March will be Crimes That Hurt You Most, Murder and Serious Violence, and also Violence Against Women and Girls as VOG. And I think in terms of that sort of longer term work, and whilst those updates will clearly continue to the end of the Commissioner's term, that they are ongoing. And I think some of the points that I'll bring out in this presentation are that whilst there is a huge amount of work going on around these areas, they are of course ongoing. And unfortunately crime continues and the response continues despite the measures that we put around it. So the dashboard there, the panel would have last seen the update in October 23, and the current update against the police and crime plan in terms of completeness is 96%. Next update will come before you again in March this year. And I've said this previously in other updates, is that because an area is complete doesn't mean to say that the work continues in there. It's just complete in terms of the Commissioner's satisfaction against that particular area in the police and crime plan. So knife crime is a good example of that, and you'll see that in this in the following slides. So this is performance and delivery against the police and crime plan for knife crime, and I'll just stop on those words there around accountability and monitoring, because knife crime, as you'll see in future slides, is linked to so many other areas that the OPCC carries out, and I'll pick out scrutiny in particular. And there's a more detailed slide and some of the
the information that the panel's been given as supplementary details some of those scrutiny programmes that sit within that. So this is an update in terms of those project objectives. There's two within the police and crime plan: ensure that violence reduction units continue across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and encourage the use of effective stop and search to make communities safe for young people. And as always, there's much more that the Commissioner and the Office support beyond the police and crime plan. And the violence reduction unit has been spoken about already during this meeting. The VRU will feature a lot in this presentation, but also I'll just go back to some of the presentations that the panels had before around preventing young people from committing crime, which was linked to Youth Commission as well, and the work the Youth Commission does within the office. The panel saw in July and October of last year, and I think that picture there of knives. And I appreciate this has been in the news very recently about some of these knives and having effectively a single use. So some of the news that you would have seen around the use of or the sale of zombie knives, but very much, and this may be an obvious point to make, but it's very much about the person behind the knife. Yes, the knife, of course, but it's also about the interventions, the education that goes on behind the person, because I've had experience when I was in the force of some very horrific crimes which have been carried out with knives, but actually they've been knives that have been readily available from people's kitchens and their kitchen drawers. So, and in terms of the violence reduction unit, that will also link into murder and serious violence update that's coming to the panel in March. So the next slides have been presented in a way that looks or seeks to answer the questions that the panel have put forward to the Commissioner. So 4 questions down the side there, and the questions, but by way of an explanation, the questions in blue there are the areas that presenting against. There's 2 slides on this particular question. Has the use of stop and search increased? I think yes is the answer to that, and there's some figures on the next slide. And has this been effective in increasing the number of knives confiscated? And again, that's there's some details in the next slide, but at this point I was just going to perhaps point out that from a stop and search perspective, the Constabulary and police in general will see stop and search as a legitimate tactic. It's one of many tactics that can be used in terms of preventing knife crime, but it's also very much linked to, and this was mentioned by the Chief Constable earlier, about linked to trust and confidence. So there's a degree or high degree of scrutiny that on behalf of the Commissioner the OPCC carries out to ensure that procedural justice within the Constabulary is right, and that actually use of powers like stop and search, for example, are properly scrutinised, and some of the panel members may be aware of that and in fact involved in some of those scrutiny areas that go on. And I think there's well documented national examples of misuse, and in some cases stop and search can also be community trigger or can trigger community incidents, and in the extreme examples, community tension. So there's a check and balance there. And as you've seen in the Commissioner's announcements, County Lines Intensification Week, there were 203 stop and search searches carried out, which takes me nicely onto the next slide to answer that question about has stop and search increased. You see in the top left-hand column there from 22 to 23, there has been an increase in stop and searches. So the reason for stop and search can be quite varied. So there's a number of reasons why officers can stop and search somebody. That could be for stolen property, for weapons, items relating to theft, criminal damage, and also drugs, and a perhaps less used one around the Terrorism Act 2000. But one of the activities that the Constabulary have taken place, as you see in Skepta there for November 22, May and November 23, was around that intensification week. And I've just taken a quote here from the National Police Chief Counsel Knife Crime Lead, Commander Stephen Clayman, about OPSEPTA, and I'm sure many of you will be aware of what that intensification week looks like. But he says that we must listen and react
to what the evidence is telling us about the conditions that lead too often to young people carrying a knife. And that very much links to the next slide, talking about the Violence Reduction Unit and the Violence Reduction Partnership. I appreciate that some of the panel members have been involved in this. Councillor Renyard mentioned earlier around the wheel and spoke of the Violence Reduction Unit. But before and in preparation for supporting the Commissioner with these slides, I went and spoke to the VRU, Violence Reduction Unit Director. And I said to him, I'm going to go and come speak to the panel. Kind of what are three points that you'd like the panel to really understand about the VRU, because it is quite a complex area to work in, certainly in terms of putting the partnership together. But he said three things to me, is that firstly, we need an effective police response to deal with knife crime, and you've heard here today, and one of the councillors mentioned about actually it's not just about the police reacting, it's actually that kind of end-to-end that we need from here. So in terms of the police response to knife crime, we need to ensure that's right from intelligence to assessing the risk, the visibility, tactics like stop and search, all the way through to potentially arrest or out of court disposal. So that's the first thing that he said, is that we need an effective police response to deal with that. The second is about getting ahead, and it's about prevention. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, and that's a lot of work that the Violence Reduction Unit does in partnership to try and get ahead, prevent and educate in terms of that. And also to meet the serious violence duty and create a sustainable framework. And again, we've spoken this morning about crime safety partnerships and the support, real badly needed support of local authorities to help achieve that. So the Ops-SCEPTA kind of pulls into that, whilst it is operational activity, and we rely on that, around that early intervention, that education and enforcement. So I appreciate this next slide is a busy one, so I'll try and do it justice by putting some narrative around it. I think first of all, talk about the Trauma-Informed Executive Board, the TIE Board. They produced a Concordat, which has been signed by 18 senior leaders, and that's in some of the supplementary documentation that the panel has been forwarded, if you've had a chance to look through that. It's chaired by Director of Public Health for the County Council, Isle of Wight, and the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. The Commissioner here, Donna Jones, is the Senior Responsible Executive, and that allows some two-way communication between the Integrated Care Board for Hampshire and Isle of Wight and also the TIE Board. And that sort of formalises that communication between the two and the trauma-informed strategy that goes with that. So that board oversees the delivery of that Concordat, the information being passed to prevent those adverse childhood experiences. So this links back to my comment about the person behind the knife and understanding what those childhood experiences may have been and how they can adversely affect that person's behaviour and understanding. And I know that some of my colleagues in the office will be probably listening closely to make sure, and again, I won't do this justice here to talk about trauma-informed. I know Commissioner may want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of that being a priority for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and that very much links into some of the commissioned services and provision that the Commissioner has supported. So moving on to which other services have been commissioned to help prevent knife crime and how is their success been evaluated. The panel was speaking earlier about operational efficiency, and I'm not putting this slide up to say that this is part of the budget, but it is certainly part of
the services that are commissioned that can help with that operational efficiency, and can also help officers not be distracted from the front line, but also get people the help that they need. So without reading out what's on the screen, just put a little bit of narrative around that. You've got choices there which focus on knife crime, child-to-child violence, county lines, including that peer drug networks, exploitation and healthy relationships. The A&E navigators, this aims to reach children and young people at a teachable, reachable moment, perhaps when they're at a real low in that sort of medical NHS environment. Trauma-informed practitioners, the tips, based on evidence around that adverse childhood experiences, those traumatic experiences, and making sure that we can employ a trauma-informed approach and understand the position and why people are acting like they are. And that area around reset, which is a voluntary custody intervention for those aged 18 to 25, often some of the key areas for, particularly in relation to knife crime, for that intervention. And that's not just in custody, that's in the community as well. So again, helping that operational activity of the constabulary. And there's also some supplementary documentation that's been sent through to the panel around other commissioned services, and I think it appeared on as Appendix B in some of the documentation that you were sent through, but this is around the Violence Reduction Fund project summary. I won't go through that, but there's some £330,000 worth of funding in there across 18 different interventions, mainly looking at mentoring, awareness and diversionary programmes. And covering the last question that the panel asked the Commissioner to cover, there's 2 slides on this around have you sought good practice from other areas that could be applied in our areas. The Violence Reduction Unit colleagues attend and now chair National VRU Learning and Evaluation Network, which regularly meet to discuss all the aspects of evaluating violent reduction. And also some, not all, but some of the funding that the VRU are involved with actually require certain pillars of intervention. So how do they know that that is working? How do you know it's being effective? Well, actually, some of the funding requires a known database that actually that intervention, if you're going to provide that intervention, that it actually works, and that's something that's pulled together nationally. And the Commissioner mentioned this about taking some areas that happen within the office and within Hampshire and the Isle of Wight and copying with pride. So it's good practice from other areas, yes, but also other areas are looking at Hampshire and the Isle of Wight and the Police and Crime Commissioner for those areas of good practices as well. So some of that good practice has some academic rigour. You'll see there around Liverpool John Moores University. So that's how we know that some of these interventions work, because it's not just a local assessment. And this also links into other services that have been commissioned to help prevent knife crime. So quite often, and I know from previous discussions that the panel members find this in their local areas, is actually you'll commission something or you'll have some activity for one area, let's use ASB as an example, and actually you'll get some benefits in another. And I think the operations that include police activity frequently do that. Of course, you may be searching for drugs, of course, and the officers will find knives. So this links into agenda item number 10 around the OPCC scrutiny programme and update. And again, the panel members have been sent some supplementary information around this. So the OPCC programme is just one area about where accountability and monitoring take place. And my intention was to stop and finish at this slide, just to say that ASB has been presented to the panel in the October panel meeting, and also there was some knife crime. There's from the scrutiny manager with the OPCC. There was some knife crime briefing that went into the panel in December. In relation to 101 there, panel heard extensively about 101 last panel meeting. That scrutiny has been completed on time, but we're still tracking and monitoring the responses back from the constabulary in relation to that. Police visibility there, the expected completion date is the end of February this year. And so just a quick overview around what takes place with scrutiny is that generally there's a 4-week review of the action against the recommendations that the scrutiny manager on behalf of the Commissioner will make. There's then a 6-month review follow-up on the delivery, hence that ongoing status there for 101. The 6 pages of supplementary information just detail that ASB knife crime and 101, and they just give a high-level overview of the summary of the recommendations, the outcomes, and some of the benefits that we seek to achieve from those scrutiny areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Pete. Donna, was there anything you wanted to add? As you mentioned, we are taking the 2 items 9 and 10 together. No? Okay. Any questions or comments from members? Yes, start with you, Maurice. And then...
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question on the A&E navigators and the youth workers in 5 A&E departments. Which A&E departments are there? I mean, obviously my area and also Alan's, then our A&E department is based in Surrey, and is there an opportunity for cross-border working there?
Yes, that's one of the 5. Portsmouth, Hampton, Isle of Wight, Winchester, and your one up there, Frimley Park.
Thank you, Don. 2 questions really. There's lots of activity, lots of partnership working, really key. I wonder, what are the bits of that partnership working that aren't quite where you would want them to be? First one. And more specifically, I think one of the difficulties is that first encounter, isn't it? You know, I hear lots of stories from parents who go, Simon, I really don't know what to do because my child has come home from school and this was the challenge socially in the school environment that says, do you know what? My child now feels like they need to get a knife because they need to protect themselves, or there's pressure, or whatever that is. And I just wonder what elements, focusing on that as a parent, when I first hear that, I suspect parents won't have any clue what to do with that first encounter. And thankfully, I would say to most parents, the great thing is your child's been able to tell you that's their encounter.
Thank you very much indeed. So in terms of the partnership working and what more could be done, 2 really key partners, I think, from a violence reduction unit perspective and the work that's been going on. One is the Home Office, who fund it, or a large part of it, and the other bit is then obviously working with local authorities and health and, you know, other partners. So 2 million comes into Hampshire for the violence reduction unit, 1.4 million comes to the PCC. Well, it all comes to me, but ring-fenced as in this is to pay for the violent reduction unit itself. So the violent reduction unit managers, 1 for Portsmouth, 1 for Southampton, 1 for the Isle of Wight and South Hampshire, and 1 sort of crudely covering the rest of Hampshire, although at the moment we've got 2 people doing that with some backup support. And then another 660,000 that comes in, which is ring-fenced to what's called GRIP funding to pay for police officers. Previously, prior to me, and for the first year I was in post, that was being spent on overtime for existing local police officers, response patrol and neighbourhoods. And there was an inspection done. Some of you remember me saying this previously, but for newer members, there was an inspection done of the VRU by HMIC, literally about 3 months after I became the Police and Crime Commissioner, and it wasn't great. School report was must try harder and should do better. And that was it brought it up my agenda 3 months in to look at it and go, oh, okay, this is not great. So one of your questions was, what have we learned from other areas? So I took that as an opportunity to have a look at that point, there were 13, there are now 20 VRUs. There were 13 VRUs in the country at that point funded by the Home Office. So I looked at how they were working, and then that led to a redesign of the VRU service because it was very patchy in the response we had across the county. So pulled it back into a much more centralised model, recruited Jim and the violent reduction unit managers we've now got, completely redesigned it. We've brought on board health data, crime data, lots of other things, working with children's services. Your councils have been amazing at helping us pulling this data together. So we've got something called the Thames Valley Data Model, which encompasses all of those different demographic with local authorities. And then we've got public health data, which sits alongside it. So we have two lots of data that we're working on to be able to highlight where are those hotspots, the most violent places and the most violent individuals that we need to be stopping from reoffending. That is the absolute primary focus. So sorry to give you a lot, I'm finishing now because I'm conscious of time. Two things on partnership. One is the Home Office. It's a bit of a frustration. I'm really grateful they're paying for it, but you have in the funding agreement, this is the part of Southampton, where this is your hotspot policing area, and there is a key deliverables that you have to meet the funding requirement. I have to sign and agree that I will make sure that the force do these things. So things like driving up visibility in, let's say it's around Shirley Park or it's around Millbank Towers, okay? But let's say there's a massive problem around Millbank Towers right now with stabbings or whatever it might be, but that may not be the case in 8 months' time, because as we all know, when you clear, hold, build, you clear the problem, you then build the community resilience to hold it and build on that moving forward. So that's the way that the force is working, and actually that problem moves somewhere else or that problem goes away. But in our funding agreement for 3 years, we're still working on. So we've fed back to say we need a little bit more flexibility here. Largely, your most challenging and violent areas are your most challenging and violent areas, but there are nuances, and the hotspot policing areas will go literally to a road. This road and that road, when we all know that the crime's going on in 2 roads away. So we've had to have some latitude here. So that's a bit of a frustration. In terms of the other way with local authorities, you're all just so stretched. You're so stretched. And of course, the more police officers we have, it helps you. The more staff you have, it helps us. I think all the professionals that are working across local authorities and the police in Hampshire do the very best that they can. There have been a couple of exceptions where I've thought, that's not great. But on the whole, it's just been incredible what professionals have been able to do with very stretched and demanding competing things. In terms of the parents' education and all of that stuff, it is a really, really big problem. And you probably have heard me talk about this in the press. I've talked about it around the TikTok Oxford Street riots and the knife carrying particularly. When we were younger, we didn't have this whole gang culture. You just had a group of girls that you hung out with or a group of lads that you played football with or whatever you did, But now this whole gang thing, it's an identity. And actually being a gang member, embedding yourself in a gang, gives you actually protection from other, if you're not inside a gang. But it also brings bigger risks, right? Because what we know is a lot of the stabbings are gang-on-gang warfare. So actually this whole carrying a knife to feel safe is a genuine problem. And I don't think, I'm 46, I don't think that there's a lot of people my age whose kids walk out that front door and say, see you later, Mum, I'll be back in a couple of hours, actually know what pressure and what social complexities their young people are facing when they step outside the front door, because they are real and they are present. And for people like me and all of us as civic leaders, it is our job to help educate and raise that awareness, which is why I've been trying to do that through the national media. I hope that answers your question, but I am paying for charities to do family support for the most at risk.
Thank you. Matt.
Well, look, thank you, Donna, and thank you for some of that last response. Actually, I think I recognise that challenge with the Home Office for some previous Safer Streets funding, where we had exactly that situation where criminality had moved and the funding pot was for a specific area. So I kind of recognise that. Thank you. I'd like to pick up the piece on the VRU in general and violent crime, I guess, in general. We know statistically that it's victims of violent crime that go on to commit violent crime. We're also, there's clear evidence to suggest that we can probably identify those individuals that are more likely to be in those difficult situations in future years. In the past, we always had early intervention through things like, oh, why has it slipped my mind? Never mind. Yeah, Sure Start. Thank you. Exactly. We've always had that in the past. And I know now we're moving towards kind of a more focused deterrent type approach where we'll hopefully engage with those young people at regular intervals and until they choose to take us up on an offer of being redirected somewhere differently. I'd just like to get your opinion, I guess, on the merits of early intervention, why we saw a decline in that over the last, again, decade, I guess, and how important that is to the whole crime picture and tackling that overall. You know, the children that are suffering these trauma events that are then causing them to go on to violence, it's clearly an area that society needs to look at from my perspective. I'd just like to hear yours.
Thank you very much. So yes, I mean the correlation of the drop in where you have more youth engagement and youth programs and early intervention, you have less troubled families, less children committing crimes, less parents and children being taken into care, etc. We know that there is a direct correlation there. So what are we doing in terms of that early intervention stuff? For me, it's about working with the ICB because actually the long-term solution here is to be giving parents, at the point of being during pregnancy, for example, giving them the right tools and skills to manage anger or to manage drug addiction or to manage money, so they're not babies being born into homes of poverty because of gambling addiction, drug addiction, alcoholism, whatever it may be. So actually, that's why trauma forms such a big part of me as Police and Crime Commissioner, because that's what I'm trying to weave through everything that we're doing. And so every contract that we now commission through my office, whether it be on a perpetrator-led programme to stop people from offending when they're coming out of Winchester, wherever they've been, Lewis Prison, everything now has trauma. So every contract that I award needs to have a trauma focus in it, because you can keep locking people up, you can keep putting people on domestic abuse courses, but ultimately you need to go back to why that individual is beating up their partner or being very coercive and controlling, and often it's back to childhood or at some point through their formative years. So unpacking what's happened leads to then the solution. Otherwise, you're only ever treating the symptom, and we need to treat the causation. So there is a direct correlation, Councillor Renard. I completely agree with you. I am funding Motivate, Yellow Brick Road, Yellow Door, sorry, not Yellow Door, domestic abuse, Y Services. There's a whole load of youth charities that I'm funding to where it's not just about the individual now when they've been excluded from school or the police, they've come across the police radar and they are referred there. There's also support for families, because what we know very often where you've got a 15-year-old that is terrorising a neighbourhood, nicking cars, taking drugs, carrying knives, member of a gang, they've got a little brother that's 11, 12, watching, thinking I want to be like him because he's my big brother. So actually working with mum and dad, if they're present, working with mum and dad and whoever's in that home to make sure that we're supporting those younger siblings, and the influence is absolutely key. Money well spent there stops them from needing that acute services at the other end. So we are doing quite a bit of that now.
Thank you. I think we all appreciate that. It's quite interesting that those policies kind of marry with where we were several years ago and have been diminished. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that presentation and for following up on the specific questions that the panel had asked there on knife crime. So the two items there then were just asked to note the update on performance and also noting the excuse me, how the Police and Crime Commission is ensuring effective and efficient policing. So we agree those recommendations. Thank you. Thank you very much. And finally, and I think probably very briefly, brings us to item 11, which is the Police and Crime Panel Work Programme, which is there as part of the agenda. Are members happy to accept that as it is? Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. Then I'll close the meeting and thank you for your attendance and thank you to Donna and your team for joining us today.